We are now live.
Am I off so I don't have to wear a mask in here now?
Yes, I think we've been
They
told.
changed the guidance, so it's
They did?
optional in the committee.
Did we get an email about it or anything?
I asked Janice this morning.
I have two, is there an email? Oh,
I didn't
yeah,
see
raise
it.
it, if anybody would, or you wanna split them in half?
I didn't see a email, but somebody said that this morning, so I asked.
So we're on the air now.
Yeah.
We're live. All right, so this is someone sent us something.
I get scolded, I'm blaming you.
After you.
Yeah.
I've got some more of those hands that. Save it
Save it, save
for later. All right.
Just for the record. Sure.
Thank you. So this is Senate Appropriations. We're continuing a walkthrough of the House passed bill, budget bill for 2023. And we left off on Friday, according to Stephanie, who probably knows, page 23. So that's the executive branch fees, funds.
So before we go into that section, E106, I just want to step back to page 18. You had a question last Friday on the 10 deputy state's attorneys because it felt like we had done them last year. And we did do them last year, but there's a reason they're here again. The deputy state, the state's attorney money that we put in ARPA had the positions, the limited service positions, but it got flipped over to general fund. And we didn't really have a way of doing general funded positions in a limited service way. So this actually sets them up as general funded but limited service. That's why you're seeing them here again. So those positions are a repeat from last year. It's just that because of the funding swap we allowed, positions had to be reconstituted as general funded limited service.
I thought we created limited service and didn't worry about the funding behind them.
Usually it's the source of funding that is the limited service-ness of them. And so it's one-time general fund. So,
I can see.
but anyway, that's the.
So the answer is, it's just really a reflection of the.
That swap that we allowed.
Okay. Yeah. All right, so we'll go to E106, everybody.
E106. Yep. And so this was a.
Well, this is the foregone revenue again.
Yes.
Saying things would be a little better if you would increase fees. Have you had many constituents tell you, thank you for not increasing my license or registration fee by a couple of bucks?
No, not one.
No. But the impact it has on transportation is $15 million, and no one even would knows the difference. So I just was asking if anybody had anyone.
We get very few things, regardless of what we do.
Well, in judiciary.
Well,
in the-
talk to me about that after last week. I mean,
Yeah.
really.
You get
Right.
No, not today. Not today. I'm not crying.
But in judiciary, language that was submitted for miscellaneous bill that would raise fees because they're people who receive them, victims' compensation, the language without the fees. So I think that's what we're seeing is instead of a fee bill, we're getting these sort of organic growth and attempted growth in fees around the building. So I'm all for this. I think it's meant to put pressure on the administration.
What we are seeing is the inadequacy of the fees, and in some cases not being raised. It's defaulting to general fund. That's how it's being dealt with. So this is just, and I think looking at what the T-bill revenues or T-fund revenues look like next year, it's going to be the year of reckoning. It's got to be an increase because this year they were able to get by, but the federal money, if you don't have the match, you're not going to have it. So I think this is just a reiteration of what we put in last year. It was helpful, and I think we before last year we tried to identify what's over $1 million in revenue. We put in a threshold.
You asked them to go back and look at the ones that were of a size that what they would be under a given CPI. Since the last time they were, mirroring the CPI since the last time they were raised. And that's the report that you got earlier in January.
So this is going to ask them to identify all fees that have not been changed or reauthorized in 2 or more years, which would be all of them. For each fee identified. So are we back to the last year's problem?
Yeah,
Of a very huge exercise?
Yes, it's the broader vote that came over from the House last year, and we narrowed it down to the bigger ones and the ones that had not been, and how, and we targeted how they would analyze the amount, bringing them up to current under CPI since the last time they were raised.
Whether there are comparable fees in other jurisdictions. What is meant by that? The other jurisdictions, meaning like how they compare to other states, or they're talking about other jurisdictions like, I wouldn't think transportation versus judiciary, but well, I don't know what that means. I don't,
Without defining the jurisdiction,
I
mean, it may be, if it's a state levied fee, do other states levy something similar to it? Or
but I'm not sure what,
do we want to look at other states and say we don't have something similar to this state?
well, I'm not sure what they mean by jurisdiction. Who wrote this? Do you know, Stephanie?
I don't know which drafter. I know that the chair of the House committee was very, wanted the.
I don't have any problem with the intent. I'm not sure.
Is it duplication of state and local?
Well, I don't know what it means by other jurisdictions. Sometimes we look at it for comparability with other states. I don't know. Well, we should take a look at that and see if we can understand it better. And the intent this time is to ask for all fees.
I don't know in sub C if you want to do anything more, the effect on the program's budget adequacy, because that's a pretty, I mean, if it's all, this is all given to the Commissioner of Finance and Management, and so.
Was that in the Dear Jane letter? That referenced it all, that assumption, that language?
Possibly.
Tax relief. I don't see it. Doesn't in the other.
Let's see if it's in the technical letter.
I like this. Somewhat unbelievably, the House proposed budget is just.
Where are you there?
Oh, that's in the Dear Jane letter.
Yeah, no,
It's not in the technical letter either.
Oh, okay. Well, maybe tomorrow we can check if the intent was to have every fee in state government identified.
So in C, where it says the effect of the program budget adequacy if the fee is not increased. I think the real question here is if during the period of time the fees haven't gone up, have they cut back the service?
Or do you want to speak to whether you're substituting it with general
And
fund?
that's what I'm concerned about as well.
I think in both cases, if they cut back on the service and if it has required
Program reduction, service reduction.
service reductions or it has required going to another.
General fund replacement.
Or their source, yeah.
Yeah, or in the transportation, has it gone to the T fund itself?
Well,
Okay.
yeah, but
Maybe we can take a look at that. Other comments? Propose a fee for each fee.
well, the big thing is the administration is cutting basically fees, but then comes through the back door. and
Here's
gets-
Senator Baruch, if you have his message.
I do.
Oh, good,
How did you know?
because
I came in at like, I think 12:45.
Thank you so much.
And we told him that you would be here after lunch, so he was holding it for you.
Okay.
Thank
Thank
you. New crew, he's so new. I know.
They're all in the hallway scribbling in their little bit of
I
pens.
know. This one has
You can
glasses.
tell we're so puzzled because we don't look like our pictures anymore.
This person has hair.
He shouldn't.
That's exactly right. This is quite a bit, this is basically put forth a fee schedule.
Yeah.
I think that's how I would think would be the easiest thing to do, but some of that,
That D though, it kind of just doesn't fit.
I don't know what it means. Yes,
Unfortunately, yeah, from my perspective, when somebody tries to increase the fees in the near future to make up for the loss of fees, it's going to be seen as a huge increase.
Mhm.
And that should also be part of any conversation about the fee problem. Because if say they jump the registration fee from, I think it's $78 to
76.
$100, huh?
76.
76 to 100 to make up for lost ground, that the public see that as a huge fee increase.
You know, Senator Sears, that's why we have taken a position in transportation historically that these fees should be updated routinely to avoid that very problem. Because the longer you go without doing it, when you do implement it, it really hits people much harder. And
And
in this
so-
case, the fact that fees haven't gone up, nobody has even noticed that, that they haven't. But they'll
Right.
notice if it goes up $10 or more.
right, and it will. And
So do you
Some-
want,
some either, you either have to use general fund or stop the service. And I don't know how you stop, for example, registrations for vehicles.
you won't, well, do you want some kind of language around?
Well, that's what I was suggesting. Unfortunately, I didn't bring the document
Anything
home
like
with me.
fees, no fees shall increase more than X%?
Well,
Yeah,
the only way to do that is make.
can't make up for 6 years of not increasing fees in 1 year.
Well, we'll see, we'll
Yeah.
make a note to see if there's something about, the capping, a percentage or something.
We're working.
Depending what the numbers look like.
I'm just worried about what happens to a future legislature or administration that recommends getting fees back where they should be.
Big thing is, the administration is cutting the revenue, but they keep adding to staff. They don't cut projects so that the people out in the boonies get a bumpier road. They expect us to take general fund money and plug the hole, and it's like a school board running a school and running a deficit. You do that this year and it's only a couple, 3 pennies, and then next year, a couple, 3
know.
more.
The cumulative
Pretty
impact.
soon, it's real dollars, and then.
And I think the concern that we're sharing is that the governor's made a high priority of no fee increase. But the fact is that has a very significant impact on the budget. It means that money that might be available to go to other services or programs are being diverted to make up the difference. It isn't without collateral impact. And so $22 million is not inconsequential. A lot of it certainly in transportation, but it's around the concept of user fees. So that kind of put in abeyance. So we'll think about maybe recommending some kind of percentage increase if a cap on a percentage increase. Well, as Senator Sears has said, if after 6 years you go to increase these fees and people are gonna get sticker shock because you're trying to make up three cycles of upgrade all at once, you're gonna really hit people much harder. And so I think that's what we're trying to capture here is put on the, as part of this report, some recommendation around how to mitigate, I don't know what we can think about. You can cap the percentage of the increase, et cetera. We'll put some creative minds together to have them identify what, in essence, they've created this situation that could end up with significant fee increases, and they need to, in their report, identify what the method by which they would mitigate the I don't the impact. I don't know if mitigate's the right word, because it doesn't mean it's going to go away, but in terms of how you're going to accommodate the transition or the implementation or something along that line. So it's it doesn't have that correction all at one time.
Well, it's a, you know, it's double the trap to be put in, because on their end, they've prevented this process from going forward for a number of cycles, and then it gives the governor, when those get put forward, it gives him rhetorical reason to veto the fee increases or to threaten to veto the fee increases. So we have some language that makes it clear we're not going to institute it all at once, but we want to get back on a regular track.
And I think we should put the assignment back on them that created it, so they need to come up with how they would recommend that fee increases be administered in such a way not to create or shock, whatever.
This is gonna
Staggered.
this is gonna lead to the same thing as our teacher retirement did. We were spending money and having fun 20 years ago with the waterfalls, or 15 years ago, when we should have been paying our retired teachers and
In this case, it's more insidious, Bobby, because
Well,
it's hidden.
worse.
It's
here.
hidden here because these fees, if the more they're shipped to the general fund, the more competition on the general fund means less money for core services, whether we're talking about housing, whether we're talking about childcare, whether we're talking about healthcare, all the state colleges, all the services that are funded by the general fund are impacted. And when that happens, then all those areas of spending that are supported by the general fund pay. There's no free lunch here. Somebody is paying. With the pensions and the healthcare, we just ran up a debt. In this case, we're extracting it from other programs and services and beneficiaries.
But
So-
someday we're gonna have to catch them all up.
Well, that's what
Somebody's gonna have. to.
that's true. Rich, you have a comment?
So why did they put this together and it be just GovOps, Ways and Means, Finance, and GovOps that gets the report? I think this all becomes an appropriations issue.
We're not on here.
No. And B, honored before January 15th, the Commissioner of Finance and Management shall submit a report to
Well, we
the
can
House
add-
Committee on GovOps. And
We should have it sent to the whole General Assembly. People should know. I don't think most legislators know exactly what are the implications.
No, they don't.
all the committees.
Well, how do you want to make,
Online presentation.
I think Richie's making a good point, because there may be new legislators, or there will be new legislators, at least there's going to be at least 4 new senators or 3 new senators, who may not be even aware that fees haven't been raised for 6 years. And so they're going to be taken by surprise and I think they should get that report too.
were
Everybody
you
should get it.
thinking just do it to the General Assembly?
Yeah, that every member of the legislature deserves to be aware of the
Then-
scope of
then
this
they-
problem.
Then the committees that really do have jurisdiction need to have some testimony on the report.
And how would you get that?
Well, for us, we would have them come in and testify to the report.
Maybe they testify in front of all the committees together and
I don't know,
We would.
we don't normally do that. We can. send
Up to a future legislature, wouldn't it, Rich?
Yeah,
well, isn't this, is this a normal situation?
well, it depends on who's governor. I mean, totally unusual.
I do think,
I'm announcing my candidacy tomorrow.
You have it coming in January 15th to the General Assembly. Would it be useful to have an update on this particular provision to joint fiscal in November?
Yeah, maybe that's a good way of,
yeah,
that's a better way than. So.
So you
we'll
keep
have
that and you'll have an intro, before
So
that, you'll have
But I
a status
do,
update on the.
because,
We'll go to that appropriations to here.
well, if the joint general assembly will take care of everybody.
Well, yeah, you weren't gonna do that.
No, you would keep it General Assembly,
Oh,
you get the
just
status
come to
update for
you
joint
first.
fiscal, and that way you have all four money chairs. Who would be missing from the status update would be GovOps, the GovOps would get the final picture in January.
Okay, that maybe is a good way to have that kind of oral presentation. All right. And then we'll add something that, that the report would include a recommendation in terms of how to implement the increases in a way not to create significant spikes or cost spikes or something. All right, and we've got that for a while. Shall we go to 107?
So 107 is basically the final housekeeping on CRF funds.
Oh, that's our language.
So this is CRF, so it ended at the end of December, we could obligate out, but this allows the finance and management, if there's anything that's outstanding in terms of unspent CRF, to apply it to costs that were allowable between March 2020, so the whole CRF period through the end of December. And then just tell us if there was any
We had
amounts of.
similar language, didn't we, in the BAA?
We might have something similar, right? That might have been for the end of this fiscal year. This brings us all the way through.
All right, I'm gonna close that out because that's sort of making sure that we're using all the CRF funding.
Yeah, before we move to E 128, which is in the legislative arena, there's a couple outstanding issues in the sort of HR and finance and management. And so the House did not speak to the $25 million of debt reduction that's on in the contingent position in the BAA. And the question is, does this committee want to be specific about the callable bonds and the property management? Or do you want to leave that open-ended as you left it in the BAA?
No, I think I wanna
Specify.
specify it, but the treasurer wants to meet with us around bonds. Should I meet with her first?
Perhaps. And then it's just an open-ended question, because if the money comes in, it's not clear exactly what that, improve the debt position of the state action is allowed. At the point, in early July, we'll know whether or not that 25 million is there to apply, but we don't have anything that's authorized to apply it to yet.
Well, my inclination was, I support the Senate position. I thought it made sense to get that debt cleaned up, get the note off the CAFR as it related to the property fund, management fund, and also the callable bond, because that also had an impact on the debt service.
The 325 is booked, the 325 of the debt service line is booked in the budget.
So I don't have any desire to revisit. I thought it was a wise decision, and the House wanted to postpone it, but I'm prepared to say what we did was fiscally sound. We ought to use the money, we've got it now, and start getting our fiscal house cleaned up. Okay.
So that's, we can
Yeah. add
brief
that.
that position, that section here. The other thing that's.
Would that be,
It'll probably be E 107.1 or something like that. And then in the HR realm, Jen Carvey let me know that the surcharge that's in the internal service fund formula that we use to fund the ethics commission, that has a sunset on it, and we probably want to extend that sunset.
Yes, we do,
Because we do want to fund them.
Right.
Um,
all right.
So that would show up in this section too, the extension of that sunset.
Should we remove the sunset?
Perhaps if that's the permanent way you want to fund the ethics commission, I mean, that's, we've started it. We started that way thinking maybe eventually we'd move it to a different source of funding, but ever since the ethics commission has been in existence, it's been funded through that mechanism. And then,
Well, it probably doesn't do any harm to revisit it, so shall we go 3 years? What did we have before?
I can't, it's either 2 or 3 years, I'll check.
Okay, anybody have thoughts about it? Keep it subject to review. It probably doesn't do any harm for people to know how much of that is in fact being charged through that internal mechanism. Okay, so we'll address the sunset, move it up, and you'll check whether it should be 3 or 5 years. Okay. So the sunset. Ethics.
And that will probably be something like E108 or whatever the HR numbers are, just because this, it touches the HR formula.
Okay.
Yeah, internal service fund formula.
All right, that's good. We've made that decision. Now we're just sergeant at arms.
Well, before we get to Sergeant Arms, a couple other legislative things.
Oh, all right, Stephanie.
So last year you had language in that allowed the carry forward in the legislature to be transferred around the various legislative entities after a plan was submitted. And Dan Dickerson, who's sort of CFOing most of the legislative budget stuff, thinks it would be a good idea to have that same language in for 23, so that when they carry forward, whatever that ends up being at the 23,
Okay, sure.
we have the flexibility to put in. Most of it comes in the legislature itself, but sometimes the costs are large out in other departments of the legislature.
That sounds fine.
Um,
We're unanimous in this.
Does
All
that,
right.
does that include, those transfers, that includes the sergeant at arms office and all of
It
the,
would include every, so there's, I think, 4 or 5 legislative line items. JFO, Leg Council, Leg IT, the legislature itself, Sergeant at Arms. Those are the 5 that exist that money would, that has a department ID and money is appropriated to.
Yeah.
It does not include the lieutenant governor.
Well,
does that lead into the next one that's on here?
So my other small item is.
not quite, Carolyn.
Not quite. There's,
All right.
I'm just checking, I'm trying to be good.
I know you are, so we're gonna add the flexibility.
Yeah, the transfer flexibility.
Uh-huh.
This is going slightly,
Are you getting all this, Chrissy?
I am.
Oh, good, good.
And the next version, next week when you see the next version of the bill, these pieces that we're talking about will be highlighted for you
Oh,
to
good.
review.
All right, so we need to move along. Consider Westman's having attention deficit problems over
No,
here.
no. I've got my attention right on.
All right, so what else do we have to do
So
before we get to sergeant at arms?
Okay, so this one is in H624, which is the creative economy bill that came over and it's now in the Senate Economic Development Committee. There is a small provision in there that allows carry forward in the legislature $10,000 of it to be used for stipends to the Farmers Night folk. And so the question is, I don't know if that bill is going to move, but if you wanted to support that same $10,000 stipend, doesn't add any burden because it would come out of the carry forward of the legislature. But it feels like that bill might not be moving anywhere, and so I'm just noting that if that provision is something that the Senate wants to do, this would be the place to put it.
Well, are any parts of that bill gonna get?
So I don't know the answer to that. The
No,
only other part of that bill,
Creative economy.
the only other part of that bill is the $17.5 million that is
Well, that,
redirected.
I know that only, I know that only part.
I think that's tied into the Senate, H159.
Right, that's what I'm.
So that's why I think that-
Come in within that.
Yeah, so I don't think the bill itself, 624, is gonna move. So I just didn't wanna sort of leave that farmer's night piece hanging.
Do we normally have some money for stipends?
I don't know that we have in the past. I think this is because of the pandemic that, being able to have people
I think
support it.
probably Allison is the point
Yeah,
person.
but why,
So it was in a House bill, the House,
But I mean, in terms of,
oh,
I would bet she,
Well, let's put it down. I mean,
Does it cover extra
the governor
police?
wanted $1 million for funds, so we should do 10,000 for.
yeah, but why shouldn't that come out of the legislative budget?
it is, that's what it,
That's what she's saying, and we'll.
Use it
It's,
as-
all it would be is the authorization to make the stipend payments out of the legislative budget, up to $10,000.
There's extra police and
So now, then we would move to the sergeant at arms.
So this would be stipend, so if you had a group coming from Brattleboro and they had to had to pay for a bus or
and they're gonna give
whatever.
them a pittance anyway, so.
Yeah, okay, all right. Even Alice is agreeing and she's thrifty as can be. 10 grand, all right.
She heard of Windsor County might come up.
Okay, 10 grand for farmer's night.
No, that's from.
Okay. See, Ag got something, farmer's night right there. We
There
want
you go.
farmers to be self-actualized, Bobby.
Well, send it back.
Bobby wants to be in charge of selecting the performers, I guess, before he authorizes any
I
money.
would prefer Bobby to perform.
He does every day.
All right, now we're moving on. Dick, are you okay with,
I'm fine.
okay, 128 Sergeant at Arms, now we'll go forward. I want to put this on hold because I have said that this is not something that I, as chair, am prepared to address. Many concerns have been expressed about this, and we have to have our joint legislative management committee review this and make a recommendation to us. So I'm putting this on hold.
Just the car, right?
This is the car, right?
Yeah,
now.
that's okay. We're approving the rest of their request, aren't we?
I assume so, but if the
Do you have
committee,
a-
right, I'll let you know, Dick, but this is
Do
the
you have a-
vehicle purchase.
Did you have a 6-month time limit on this,
On what?
on the whole?
Well, I'm holding it until joint legislative management committee, of which I'm also a member, has a chance to review the request. I think it raises discussion around what our Capitol Police roles they should play, the extent of which the focus is on that law enforcement and so forth. And I believe that that's a larger discussion that needs to be brought before the legislative management committee.
Well, certainly, I would hope our Capitol Police are confined to this building, I thought.
Well, they're not.
There are some things that have changed, and I think probably.
They're not getting the idea behind the vehicle was if you have a person that you have to transport to jail or whatever, you can't use the Montpelier police anymore.
No, they won't do it.
Yeah, like the guy who came, the stalker guy.
Yeah.
still around.
And then,
They arrested him here, I think. didn't they?
and then you had the.
Where would you like to hold them in the meantime?
Well, those are all the discussions that joint legislative management
Boy,
needs
they
to have
really
there.
look ahead for our protection.
Well, those were the kind of discussions I had with the chief and with the sergeant at arms. And so I'm perfectly fine with putting on hold until you have a discussion with joint management. But I just did want to bring up that reality that without any way to transport somebody they arrest, it puts them in a position of where would you hold that person within this building?
And I know that, and that's been part of the rationale for it. Some people-
Probably the agricultural committee room would be, Senate Ag would be.
No, that little, the little room where you go if you're sick. Put a couple
You've been
of bars
sick for
over that little small window and put them in there.
You can say it, different people have, there's been some very strong reaction and they need to have an explanation. People need to understand it. And so, yes, Rich, do you want to add?
I do have a question in the overall. Generally carry forwards in agencies and departments get swept.
No, we actually grant the carry forward authority
To
in the budget
avoid
adjustment.
dumping all that money in
that
it.
sort of use it or lose it attempt, mentality.
And that's what we do in every department
We
across
do
the
it
state.
for general fund and transportation fund and ed fund. So so special funds don't have automatic carry forward authority, federal funds don't. But you grant that authority in the budget adjustment. There's a report on the carry forwards that are there. We ask them to report on their carry forward positions when they come into the budget, with their budget documents, because it's one-time money. Some of it's obligated, some of it's just timing of things, especially on the operating side.
I quite don't mind if it is for ongoing stuff and it couldn't be completed in those ways. But in this, and if across state government they do that, if we once lease a car or buy a car or do anything here,
Forever.
it's gonna be forever.
Oh, yeah.
And to say that this is coming out of carry forward, when we know that carry forward is really general fund, we're committing ourselves to a long-term expenditure.
Yes.
If that's what happens in every department across state government, I don't like that. If the carry forward is to finish up something that's already started in that, I'm fine with that. It's just, I really don't like the idea that just because it's carry forward and you characterize it because it's carry forward, you do something new, that's a different item.
Well, in
it's
this
okay.
case, it's a lease, so a lease can be
Yeah,
broken.
but they're gonna release
Which is right.
next year.
If we lease it, it's gonna be a permanent,
Well,
I favor them having some means of transport. But whether that has to be a,
Electric bicycle.
semi-permanent car that's, I don't know.
that's why I think the
Yeah,
case needs to be made.
Supposed to do
And I know that we've had people say, well, there should be no problem giving me a salary increase because of carry forward. Carry forward is really one-time money. And so we do need to be careful.
But that's my point. If across state government, what we allow is carry forward to do things that are more ongoing.
That's not the general practice. We don't use carry forward for base ongoing obligations.
That's what this is.
To the extent that, it takes time to spend on lumpy things or
I totally-
sometimes agencies sort of use it as sort of a savings to get to something that they can then fund. But when we have carry forward that's aged, we sweep it back as reversions. That's what you usually see in the
Right, well,
reversion
that's
section.
what my recollection of most in practice amounts to. I just in these where we're starting something and you know that once you start it, it's gonna go on
So
forever.
your comment is one of exercising caution around using carry forward to start this up.
And is a practice anywhere in state government.
Or if you start it, then you are acknowledging that you're creating potentially a long-term obligation.
I think when the committee meets to talk about this, the Washington County Sheriff's Department is right down at the end of this.
The sheriffs are so short-handed, they can't provide security in
Well,
the
I
courts.
think I would at least give them a phone call and ask them if they could, if we had
Well, Moya-
something at the State House that needed transport, if they could come and get them.
Well, we will have to rely on the committee to explore those. My understanding is that the Montpelier Police Department, that used to be the fallback, no longer is able to do that, perform that function. And
We
I
got a
think that was,
letter on that.
Senator Sears talked to the chief
Talk
about,
to them. I don't have a
And the
Yeah.
other issue,
Talk to them about it. Talk to the chief.
the other
Yeah,
issue.
and I believe the sheriffs are shorthanded as well. So, we can go back to the old system where, I don't, the car is a pilot project, by the way, so. But I think Senator Kitchell has a good idea. Talk it over with the management committee, and determine whether or not we should fund it or not.
But that's a $300 a week expenditure, and we're here, what, 16, 18 weeks? So the other half of the year.
Well, people are threatening people 52 weeks of the year that serve in state government.
And the speaker.
Doesn't, it's not just during the legislative session that I think that there's some of the threats that have come to members of the legislature, particularly the leadership, are at any time of year.
So this conversation is typifying the different perspectives. And that's why I have gone to the chair, who currently is the pro tem, to say this is an issue that needs to be discussed and vetted by the Joint Legislative Management Committee and a recommendation. So all these kinds of perspectives and questions can be deliberated by that group that was created specifically to make these decisions or recommendations. And they oversee the budget for the legislature. That committee does. And this is certainly a budgetary
Agreement with that, that's fine.
yes, Rich.
And I would just say for myself, when whatever decision they make then, this should either be a one-time general fund appropriation, or it should be in general fund ongoing. I think to characterize it as carry forward is, it doesn't feel right to me, because we're
Can
gonna
I just explain that, Rich? It's a pilot, it's intended to be a pilot project to see if there's actual use for it or if there's some other way. So I think that's why they use
I
carry
would
forward.
rather it be viewed as one-time general fund to fund the
Well,
pilot.
that's really what this is.
But by saying this, I think it's confusing.
So the other way to do that, would be to revert the $15,000 from sergeant at arms, and then move this into the one-time section of the bill if you're going to go forward with it. If you wanted to sort of
If you
more
wanted to-
distinctly create it under a one-time appropriation.
Well, we can look at the mechanics of it after we get a recommendation of whether we do it or not. The other thing is, when any pilot, I think we need to have some metrics. How do you determine that a pilot was successful or not? And I don't know whether any criteria have been developed that would help us. I don't know in terms of number of transports, the number, I think we should have some idea.
Sort of report back to DevOps.
I think we need to have some
Or
kind
the
of.
JLMC.
Yeah, I think that we need to say they will develop evaluation metrics and report back.
But all we gotta do is call the Montpelier Police Department and
They won't
ask.
come.
I know, but call and say, how many times in the last 5 years have you come to the State House to pick up somebody that takes to jail?
Well, I would think our chief should be able to answer that for the period of time he spent here. If he's putting this forward as a request, he ought to be able to provide that basic data.
I mean, I can just imagine that vehicle in my mind. Capitol Police in letters this big, the whole length of it, and stripes here and stripes and lights all over, I mean.
I think we have gummed this one enough,
I think we
considering that we're not the
got
ones going to be making the recommendation.
Pending JLMC.
But if there's a recommendation to do this, then we will move the money in the way that would make it very clear. Somehow one time almost appears very easy and free. The other is, if you're having a pilot, then you have to have some evaluation criteria to say, did it, why was it needed, did it work, and was it worth the investment?
Well, I mean, I hate to, I don't begrudge them. If this is the only way they could get transport. I don't begrudge them. With that said, they have the numbers at hand right now. They know how many people they've
Well,
transported
then
in the
they can
last
give that
5
at the
years.
meeting.
I would imagine it's 1 or 2 in 5 years. Is that a compelling rationale even for the pilot? I mean,
they could come with those numbers if they wanted.
Janet Miller, give us some information
I
on
think
the car and why they needed it, she did.
she
I
did
didn't
give
know.
us
Yes,
information,
she did.
but
So here's a good idea, put it over there, sounds like.
So-
Let that committee look at it.
that's all I'm saying is they will look at it and I think it does beg a larger discussion around, obviously, security and police and exactly what Capitol Police. And I think probably the world has changed a
The
lot
world has changed tremendously.
in the last few years in terms of security, the number of people that sometimes are in the building, the threats that have been made.
And it's year round.
What?
There's tons of people here year round.
Well, yeah, and the people on
So
tour.
Committee, I'm going to suggest we keep going because we've got quite a bit more. We have 73 pages in total.
can we talk about it on our break?
Yes, you may. Right now, we are going to move on to the pension
You're
investment.
excited.
Well, before we go to that.
Oh, my God, oh, my God.
This is why we're walking through this. Oh my God. So there's, the treasurer had sent over several weeks ago, the update to the municipal contribution
uh-huh.
rates. And so I have a draft of it here. If we're putting it in the big bill, this is right before this VPIC piece was where it would go.
Mhm.
I do want you to, I'm just gonna pass the document down. You may choose to only do the first year of it. It's 4 sections with 4 years of, stepped up contribution rates for the municipal side. On the House side, they are actually
Can
going
you
to.
send what the center is here?
I did.
Oh, you did?
Yep, it should be
Those
here
are
in
the
the,
ones from Becky, yeah.
yep, the one that looks like this.
You got it, Dick?
So that,
Chrissy sent it to you.
the House, as I understand it, GovOps has gotten
Yes.
permission to.
Yes,
actually-
I'm sorry, I was muted.
And that's, I don't know if there's a preference. We had told the treasurer it wasn't gonna go in the pension bill, it didn't go on the other sort of, union bill that came out on the state paid deputies. And so we had said we would put it into the budget
You're right.
bill. And so it may come out if you put it in, if there's another vehicle that has it in that's moving. But I would suggest that you either put the very first part of it in, just so we have that space held for or put it in entirely. And this is the recommendation from the treasurer, and I believe from the board.
And there's agreement
Yeah.
between all the parties on the.
But the House side wanted to take testimony on it, so.
The group B's gotta put 12.35%.
And then it grows up to 13.1 over 4 years. So that's I just wanted to have you make a decision about whether or not you want to have a holding place for it and then see how the rest of the
Well,
section.
I've said that we would make a holding place because they do need to make, we do have a July 1 deadline. And so I said the budget would be the last vehicle. And so the question would be, do you know whether the House is?
I just learned this right before I came in, that the House was, had this desire to do it as a separate bill, because we're well past the committee bill.
I think at this point, to get into for the period July 2024 through 25, I'm a little reluctant to put in the budget bill. I mean, the urgency isn't there, is it?
Well, I think that, I don't know if the agreement is for this, the reason we're doing it outside, there's a statutory,
Or is it for,
so
it's for 23, 26.
yeah.
So I think we should not attempt to muddy around with it.
Put it in
Just
as it is.
put it in as it is.
It may come out in the conference if another bill is moving.
Otherwise, it's gonna, you're gonna have to change the heading, you're gonna have to, I think if this is what's been negotiated, there's agreement on it.
And then it's session law for 4 years, and then it would revert back down to the rates that are in statute.
Right, so let us just put it in the way it is. And if the House acts, and I love it when I get things sent to me, the House didn't have time to take this up, and it's like they have all day.
So it'll come in around E133 or so.
All right,
I just don't know what the municipal section is.
all right, so we'll just add
And this is in the,
muni.
we're in the treasurer's arena here in the part of the bill before we go to the VTech, the Vermont Pension Investment Commission.
Right, okay, all right,
And
so right now we'll just plop the whole thing in.
Okay.
Moving right along now to VTech.
Okay, so Becky Wasserman has redrafted this. It was, didn't get caught in time, but there's some technical issues with the way this E131.1 is drafted.
We created that last year.
You separated the commission from the treasurers and set them separately. And they're asking it to be transferred, they are funded through the pension funds. But it's one collective effort prorated to the pension funds, and they want to put that into the special fund specific for the Pension Investment Commission, but they didn't create the special fund.
Oh, no, we hate special
I know.
funds.
So here's the replacement language from Becky Wasserman to be technically correct to accomplish this.
All right, could you pass the,
Oh, sorry.
documents out?
So what you see is that
This is a replacement for this.
for 131.1, and then 131.1A or 134.1 gets replaced at the top of the page. You just got a new 134.1A or 2. I think 2 is probably the better nomenclature. Would create the special fund for VTech. And then there's really no change in the what is currently now 134.1A should be 134.3 when we do it. That doesn't change at all. The other consideration here in the VPIC world, in the Vermont Pension Investment Commission world, is a bill we have in our drawer, the divestment bill. We said we were going to hold that for conversation in the budget. And I don't know if you want to turn to that bill now, which would the main issue that's in there is that we've created that they asked for another position and we funded from the same source. And whether or not any part of that bill you wanted to bring into the big bill.
We said we had 2 small bills that we thought we could just consider for inclusion in the budget. And one was a bill that came out of economic development, and it had to do with looking at using pension investments for certain to support climate change goals, so not being invested in
With
gas, coal, and
but also mirroring it to the financial needs. So there was criteria.
yeah, there was criteria as well, but it was something that was recommended by the climate council. It doesn't commit to anything, it just looks at it and their parameters around it. So we can look at that language now.
Chrissy, do you have copies of, I think it's S251.
Does the treasurer support that?
I did.
don't think so.
Let me pull it up for you.
I think it is, I think it
Support
was
any
form.
kind of investment.
I thought in its form, I didn't think it was.
I didn't think
That I've
so.
ever heard of.
We will double check.
I don't think it's an actual
Yes, it
it's
doesn't-
actually doing the analysis.
It doesn't require anything other than to look at it.
I mean, I think what you used to say was we have no investments directly in fossil fuels, but as part of some other grouping that we don't even look at really, there might be some in there.
I thought she was, I think that's right, but I think in a general way, she's always been opposed to having her hands tied. in
Yeah,
terms of-
because then one group could say, we don't want diamond mining in
Right.
South Africa, and we don't, want this particular.
Well,
And in fact, you can put your money in a big fund if you want, rather than in a
So-
regular fund.
you have also separated out to the Vermont Pension Investment Commission, so it's their call, not the treasurer's necessarily. It's on the commission, but
Is that how it's now?
It would,
What,
it
yeah,
would appear to me if we invest in any mutual funds, which we do, that it becomes very hard
Yeah.
to.
That'll be all part of the analysis.
Yeah, it becomes virtually
But
impossible.
there are certain investment instruments that are designed in such a way to have a portfolio to,
Yes,
look
and,
at.
at that, there has to be recognized that, it's more expensive.
Right.
Because
Uh-huh.
if you do some sort of an index fund that mirrors the whole market, it's a percentage of everything that goes on in exchange. And that really, it becomes very impossible to get low-cost fees and,
Yeah.
and.
Well, that would be all part of putting it, that into formal, I guess.
How much does this cost?
I don't have the bill, Alice, in
So
front
I
of
have the introduced bill here. Is this actually the bill that came out?
Good for you.
me. Maybe we should keep going and then people can have a chance to
Yeah.
look at it.
So
We'll come back.
we'll create a space for it to come back to
Yes.
and what parts of the bill would come in, because I thought there was a position, I know, the version I saw, I thought was asking
Maybe that's
for
why
the
Kate,
analytics for it.
we didn't take it up because it came in with that big crush of bills and we said, look, this is something that could be done this way.
So we might have an email from Eric Henry back in the early part of the month on it
The
as well.
funds appropriated in B of this act are costs to the pension funds and have been considered in each pension fund actuarial, but have not been included in the funds appropriated of this act. Could you tell me what that is? Source of funds, VPIC. Funds appropriated from the pension are intended with A. Are costs of the state's.
So it's identifying that since we've broken out the cost of BPIC into section E 134.1.
It's a B 134.
Yeah, so B 130. So that's where the appropriations are for the municipal and the state. So it all used to be in one place in the treasurer's budget. And now the portion of it that needs to cover the investment is being broken out. And so it's saying that it's covered in the actuarial evaluation. We're not double appropriating the commission's portion of it, I think.
Might
is what
have
it's
not
trying to
been
say.
appropriated. It's very hard to follow.
They have not been included in the funds appropriated, B 133, 134, and 514. So that's municipal and teachers, 133 and 514, and state employees, 134. So those are the three funds. And what they're saying here is we valued the whole cost of administering the plans in each of them, but the portion for the pension investment commission is not included in these other appropriation line items. We're appropriating it directly into this special fund for the pension commission. So it's just a way of identifying that we're not double billing the cost of the pension investment commission, is the way I read that.
Yeah, I can understand B, but A is kind of hard to follow, but have not been included. The funds are costs, have not been considered in the evaluation. Have been considered.
Yeah, they have
But
been,
not included.
but not included in the appropriation in other places.
All right,
It's a little bit of a tongue twister.
it is. It's more than I can do on a Tuesday afternoon. All right, so this is Becky's rewrite of section E 134.1 and 1A.
And then what the tongue twister would become B.
Okay.
Although we might do them as 131. We'll figure out what the right name, numbering is on the sections.
Well, I think we will defer to our legal counsel and our joint fiscal that this is the right way to express this. And also making sure that we are recognizing the cost of this BPIC commission. So that takes us over to grand list litigation.
It does, and I have
I wanted to rewrite that.
yeah, and so this is the version that I think the tax department provided, although I think the numbers might still be outstanding in terms of the dollar amounts. So it's no longer specific to the Trans-Canada Hydro, but it also, their recommendation includes for expenses incurred to undertake complex commercial and utility property appraisals.
Good.
And so I don't know if, I don't know if we need anything specific to being retroactively applied to costs.
Solar projects, this would be something they need help with.
You mean towns need help appraising solar projects?
I mean,
Well,
I'm assuming they might.
well,
So the,
this looks fine, but
This is fine.
It's an expansion of the use of the funds
Yeah.
to property appraisals. But what we've found is that there are a number of complex
Yeah.
properties.
Well, we
Yeah.
we passed that bill in here that came from finance that increased the per parcel payment too.
Right.
Will that be in the numbers part of the bill, or do we need to say anything here?
no, you, and that
That's
I'm hearing is you will have to increase the per parcel line item by that $850.
Right.
It's a general fund line item now.
Yep.
To the extent that you do more than the 9 and the 70 that is listed here. If that would also be a little bit of an increase in that line item.
But why would,
And that's a general fund line item.
It has been since we did away with the transfer to the ed fund.
why would we have to forward $9,000?
Because the towns ended up having to defend the appraisal.
Yeah.
So when we did the dams on the Connecticut River, the owner appealed every appraisal. And the towns, and many of these very small towns that are hosting these facilities, 75–80% of the money goes to the ed fund, not to the town. So it created a real financial burden for towns to support expensive litigation. So this has been something that we've done. And
Yeah.
we've helped, even before that, we helped the little towns of Orange and Topsom for the poles and wire appraisals done by Washington Electric. So we've had this problem where, and I guess it goes back to Act 60, somebody was talking about the debate, should the appraisals be done statewide or should they be done locally? And I guess Nelson Giacomo was very insistent that it be done locally. Because how do you appraise the granite quarry? I don't, or how do you appraise? But with the dams, it was not only the dams, physical structure, but there was flowage rights, there were reservoirs, and it got really complicated, and you had to, so this committee, and I'm the only member of this committee, back in 2008, Senator Sears was here, where we put in money because the dams had not been appraised since Vince Aluzzi was proposing the statewide. And what was happening is the appraisals were out of date, and the Trans-Canada was getting a sweetheart deal because they were underappraised. So we put in money, an appropriation, to PVR to contract with an entity with expertise in this area. And company Sanssouci was the man's last name, did the appraisals, and they all held up.
Yeah. One.
Rockingham had a big appraisal. Some of the dams are shared by multiple towns. They're shared by New Hampshire. It is really complicated. So we helped the towns because defending the appraisals was actually benefiting the ed fund about 3-1 over what the town, so these little
Some
towns.
towns didn't care because it was too expensive and they didn't get enough out of it.
But they couldn't because if
Well, I
they
know.
settled for too low, we also had a provision that the state could come back on the town and collect the difference. So they were in a real no-win situation, and that was the majority of the funds went to the ed fund, but they were on the hook for the cost of the appeal. And if they said, we don't, and if they said, we don't want to fund an appeal, we'll just settle, and if it turned out to be too low, state could come back and say, you settled for too little, you owe us. So the towns are caught in between.
That's the same issue that went on.
So this is just really helped
It helped the little
Helps little
towns that
towns.
happen to be the host. Now, what we have right now is the little town of Sheldon. That's in the same thing, but it didn't come in, and that's what we're talking about, making some adjustment here because it wasn't a Trans-Canada dam, but the same issues pertain to that appraisal as Trans-Canada.
Well, but in that bill that came over here, what they do is they set up a $1 million fund to help the towns litigate.
No, what they did was, if the town had to refund property taxes,
limited to $1 million.
Yeah, that had the limit.
it was a refund of the
But
property
that
taxes.
is because of the litigation, because you get to the end of the year
Truing up
and
the ed fund for the town.
So in other words,
Basically what it is.
if they collected, if they lost on appeal and they'd collected too much in the way of taxes, then the property owner had to be compensated. And so in the case it was Sheldon, they had to return the overpayment on taxes. So not only did they get hit with the overpay, and then they raised the cap to $1 million because to address this, because the ed fund got money that was too high. So that's what the $1 million there was about. But the other has been, the other two pieces have been helping defend the appraisal and retaining services for someone else has the expertise to actually appraise and value these properties.
But the problem with the appeal system is there is a closing date at the end of the calendar. And if you appeal into the next year and the appraisal goes against you, so many towns have been settling in these tax disputes just because they were afraid.
But then the state would come in and say, you settled for too low and you pony up. And then there's that coefficient of dispersion. But I don't think we want to talk about that.
No, we don't.
right now.
So
Can I
that's-
mention one other
this
thing?
is gonna go in.
So like, so this is gonna be subject to some changes to address kind of the equity issue with this other property. The tax department is asking for some more flexibility, and it does broaden it to just hydro dams
Yeah.
and other complicated, and it's really defending the state grand list because the ed fund is, in most towns, it's out of your tax bill, it's 75-80% are to the ed fund and 20%, depending on what you've got from municipal government, but for small towns, municipal government costs are quite small. So yes, Rich.
So I'm gonna bring something up that, and just make a statement about this when we made the switch from the general fund transfer into the ed fund, and we switched out and gave them the sales tax.
Yeah.
Ever since we've done that, the sales tax has grown faster than what anyone expected and the ed fund made out. In that decision, when we did that, we took a whole bunch of expenses, like
This is one of them.
this is one of them, the 800,000 is the increase. That all remains a general fund expense, when the benefit to all of this really is the property taxes to the ed fund.
But it used to be different, and changed that about 4 or 5 years ago.
We changed that when we switched the sales tax out for the general fund, and the sales tax has grown much faster than the general fund transfer. So it's another case where the ed
So-
fund.
Well, the
is
only
being-
Here's the main change,
But don't
but the
forget,
dollars have changed as well, a little bit for the year.
7 million to about 40.
I'm,
So you may recall that last year in the bill, you actually put in how did the ed fund make out? It's due next year. It's a multi-year picture with the moving pieces. Because I think there are people on the ed fund side that feel that they might have the opposite. Maybe they didn't make out as well.
well, I would say this is my pitch for next year when it comes and you see how much the sales tax has grown.
Well, you'll have to run again, so you
Yeah,
can monitor
we'll
that.
have to
Particularly the sales tax is made since because we made that transfer at a time when none of the internet
Yeah,
companies
it was
were.
before the major decision. But everything has been so distorted, and of course, the purchase and use, a third of purchase and use goes into the ed fund. And certainly, car sales have been really very robust. On the other hand, 10 billion has also really inflated general fund revenues. So this is a period of time, it's hard to, sort of sitting on a cactus and figure out what thorn hit you the worst.
I'm just saying, when that report comes next year and we take a look at it, the ed fund has done quite well with that switch.
Well, I guess what you're maybe building up to is these kinds of expenditures ought to be borne by the ed fund, not the general fund.
Bingo.
I'm paid big bucks to
Wasn't
figure
this,
that out.
wasn't this, wasn't it when
It
they-
was
And it was ed fund.
It was an ed fund expense all the way up until you made the big change in terms of no longer having an
Paying
ed
the
fund
listers,
transfer and dedicating that sales tax. In that, trying to come to balance in that 1 year, you switched some ed fund items into the general fund. Some you did not switch in, like they wanted early college to come over, you left that in
No,
there.
I would not, because that was, I wasn't totally, and then of course, then they got.
Just
Now
saying,
now that we're.
the sales tax has grown like tops.
So because we have a very small town that's been hard hit
Mhm.
and didn't get help.
This is good.
We need to put some more money in here.
On the defense side.
On the defense, and I need to have more information about where the cost was it in, I think it was all the defense, but it might have been also for the appraisal too.
Okay, for this expert split between the, I thought it was all
What
defense.
was Sheldon's issue?
They have a hydro dam.
They have a hydro dam.
Up there too.
It's just not a Trans-Canada.
It's not Trans-Canada.
It just wasn't a Trans-Canada. And I sort of feel from a fairness perspective that was.
This was always limited to the Trans-Canada world.
Well, because that's all I was aware of at the time I did it. In 2008. Think about how many years ago that
Well,
was.
Cory Parent
Yeah,
will
Trans
send
Canada.
us all a letter thanking us for helping his little town out up in Franklin.
Well, that's good. Well, I mean, Trans-Canada sold those plants quite a long time ago.
Yeah, they have.
We should
But there's still, every time there's.
His issue still.
I think we're at the time when you're switching to AHS, the pilot language within E142, 143, and 144 is this, the boilerplate language about which special fund is coming from every year. And then that puts us right at the protection section where we could start tomorrow.
And then, was it E203? Was that the one that Willa was so
Yes,
concerned
so
about?
I have that marked as striking it and then a replacement pending from Senate Judiciary.
Okay,
Great.
all right. We're counting on you, Dick, on that.
I was just.
So is this on
texting
hold
Dick
or
that-
struck?
No, we're gonna replace it.
Yeah, so for now, you're not keeping the House language at all, is my understanding, and then we're waiting for this language with the Senate.
I thought we were just taking it out completely.
Yes, we are.
Stephanie, well, yeah, but you want to put something in its place?
Well, you mentioned that might be a possibility on Friday. And so that's the question. We know this language is gone. And the question is, will there be a replacement from the Senate Judiciary Committee?
Well, I'll need to schedule that next week in Senate Judiciary then.
Okay,
I don't-
but in the meantime, it's gone.
Right now, I don't have a copy of it because I left my papers
Each goes,
on the desk because I thought I was coming back today.
It's that restorative justice working group.
we're
Yeah.
really wanting to understand the purpose.
So
It's
we're
Alice.
gonna-
Bill, do you have it so we can make sure Peggy?
And we can,
Okay.
we can send Senator
Okay.
Sears the E203 in an attachment.
Yes.
So he has it specifically.
That's
Well,
actually
and to Peggy too.
Okay, you got it, that one section, okay?
Do you know who drafted that by any chance?
I don't know, it seems almost like a bill that got orphaned and then they stuck it in here because,
You know, it does, doesn't it?
yeah.
I will ask if that's what happened, or if they asked the drafter to, or if they just decided to.
No, I don't care. We'll take a look at it in Senate Judiciary next week and decide whether to include anything or not.
All right, it's all in your capable hands, Senator Sears.
Hey, Senator
Well,
Sears,
it's Senator Baruth and Senator Nitka will handle it.
All right.
Senator Sears, did you see how artfully the chair jumped right over the payment in lieu of taxes to Montpelier? They're special.
I did. I think we should take it out again, but I don't, probably only get 2 votes.
There was an increase.
Especially if they won't transport our prisoners, force us into buying.
I hear that.
All right, we're back. All right, so, Adam, are you here for any particular purpose? We have the folks here from the Agency of Human Services, so I didn't know if you were here to listen to that.
My ears started ringing, Madam Chair, when you went over section E106. which was the fees.
Oh.
And I think we probably need to hear from the administration.
We do need to, I asked about that very specifically because of the,
We didn't put that in our letter in part because, as we said earlier, we tried to stick to the high points, but that section, I think, absent the philosophical debate, which I don't think would be useful, I think that section could use some help.
well, you have an opportunity then to,
Yeah.
but
Out.
something is going in because obviously there's a great deal of concern about the foregone revenues and the impact it's having. And so, but the way it's written, it seems like, well, maybe the easiest thing is to produce a fee bill.
We produce a fee report every year. I mean,
All right, well, we have folks from the Agency of Human Services. You're welcome to observe.
I'm happy to.
All right. So let's go to Human Services, and so you had sent them communication around some questions.
We had, and they followed up yesterday, and I gave them a little bit more of a heads up, and they have a slide deck as well.
Pass this down for you, sir.
Yeah, because it's not Agency of Administration, they like Ricker Pond. The restorative work group, they don't like 203 either. Well, it's gone, so you don't need to worry about that. Okay, so we have with us today Jenny Samuelson, AHS Secretary Office, Rich Donahue, CFO, Emily Haas, Commissioner of Mental Health, Commissioner White from Dale. Do we have DCF as well?
No.
No, okay. All right, well, we wanted to come back, and obviously we had sent you some information. One of the things that I in the House, obviously, they were trying to grapple with how to shore up some of our critical service delivery areas. And the two that come to mind are right off the top, and that would be the SSAs and the DAs at a 3%, and exactly how we expected those systems to provide the level of services that people would want and the quality that they would want in this environment where workforce costs are going up, where wages are going up. Many of the agencies operate group facilities, residential facilities, and that 3% would have to accommodate increases in food and fuel and other related costs. And so the House moving other money around, and we're hearing from all the places that didn't get the money that the governor recommended, are coming in saying, we would like our money. And on the other hand, there's a long-term concern on the part of this legislature around the level of chronic underfunding that has gone out to community-based organizations that are providing essential services. So the committee was very interested in looking at the 3% and how that amount was arrived at, and in your thinking, how you thought, did you expect to see prioritization of services, certain individuals that you would recommend not be served, because inherent in that level of funding would be the need to make some very significant budgetary reductions. And so that was one of the first questions, was how was that 3% arrived at? And maybe that's something that Secretary Samuelson can help us understand, because we're hearing from Howard Center, the PNMI facilities, which would be also group homes, that their base year at 2019, the world has changed, and they're really finding that the level of reimbursement is not sufficient. And so this is the world that is being conveyed to us. And I suppose you can say you got 3%, you make it work. That would be up to every agency to say, how do they make it work? But that perhaps is not the way that we would want to do it, or we would say, these are our priorities, this is what we're willing to fund. And we understand that there will be areas of need that would be identified that we simply can't address. So if you could give us some background in terms of your priority and thinking as you were developing these budget recommendations, the committee would find that helpful.
Thank you, Senator Kitchell, Madam Chair. I will definitely walk through some of those pieces. For the record, this is Jenny Samuelson, Secretary for the Agency of Human Services. The governor's budget recommended a 3%, and it was specifically for the reasons that you've mentioned, that we needed to balance the needs of the designated agencies and the SSAs while making the necessary investments in other providers. So when the budget was being built, we recognized that we were seeing significant increases in overall costs from those providers that would need to look at and adjust rates. I think that that's particularly important to recognize that this comes at a time when we're also in the middle of negotiating the 1115 waiver. And as a reminder, the 1115 waiver gives us the flexibility to make investments in our home and community-based services providers, like our CRT program, like our Choices for Care program, but it keeps us within a capitated budget. And so as a part of our negotiations, we've been working hard to ensure that we both have the flexibility and that we have the budget neutrality cap that is necessary to be able to sustain the programs that we already have. As we went into this into the budget making process, we recognized in that 1115 waiver discussion and conversation with CMS that the federal policy had changed since the last time we updated our waiver, and that our starting point of those negotiations put us significantly underwater. We've been engaging with CMS, and CMS has been working with Vermont, but their hands in some cases are tied. And though we're in a better place than where we started, which was underwater, and we are in a place that will allow us to keep our programs, there's very little room in the current proposed cap from CMS, which they say is their best and final offer, to both increase rates and to do additional innovation while optimizing our federal funds. And so we took that into account. In fact, a full increase of what was originally proposed would have potentially absorbed most or all of the cap that we had. We recognize that that comes at a difficult time where we're seeing inflationary pressures across our entire health and human services system. And the 3% was derived recognizing that by providing a large increase to one provider or one provider group, without the context of the needs of the full health and human services system, leaves us with little room to address issues that are surfacing now with our PNMI providers, our long-term care providers, and many of the other core pieces of our system. Most of whom are significantly funded through our Medicaid program, and keeping them in the system ensures access to Medicaid beneficiaries. This challenge includes the ability to address the co-occurring system of care, both for our mental health and our substance use, in a year where we've seen over a 30% increase in substance use related deaths. In order to get to the 7% that's currently proposed, the majority of that funding comes out of two places, one of which is a $4.8 million general fund that would have funded prevention and treatment and substance use, and the other is expanding our programs, our summer and after school programs for youth, which we believe would address some of the root causes of the mental health issues that we're seeing. Minimally, if we move forward with the rate increases as the governor proposed and as the legislature proposed, we want to ensure that there's equity across the designated agency and social and the SSA systems, and to include accountability between providers, so that we can continue to improve the outcomes and to achieve the rate increases. To achieve those rate increases, we believe that needs to be tied to transparency. So that's a long way of saying that the 3% was derived based on a known need at our designated agencies, and comes with a willingness to work with them to prioritize, but also a known need at many of our other providers at a time where our federal investments are declining instead of increasing.
Okay, there are some areas where in fact you're proposing increased use of Medicaid. We had another email, needless to say, we're hearing from everyone, that you were trying to make in DCF Medicaid reimbursable for the balance and restorative justice programs. That was part of your budget request. Is that part of you've calculated in? I realize, I understand about the cap. The other thing that we're looking at, certainly we've been getting communications on the prevention front, and we are trying to balance out priorities. One of the things we're sitting on, it started April 1st, and that is our whole cannabis program has started operational. And within that legislation, there is actually an allocation of 30% of the excise revenues will go to prevention. So my question was, in developing that proposal, how did that fit relative to the fact that right on the horizon, we actually have a very significant dedicated funding stream for particularly for substance use prevention? And then how does this fit within, we haven't had Monica Hutt in, but one of our reasons for creating this kind of over sort of consolidated system of prevention, understanding the interplay between efforts, was to create that chief prevention officer. So I was just wondering, is there a prevention plan that these recommendations are really fitting in as well? So those are a couple of questions on those recommendations, although I think the priority is going to be, are we going to pay for treatment and ultimately co-occurring disorder treatment, and how much more we put into prevention when in fact we're going to have significant money for prevention dedicated starting this coming fiscal year.
I can't speak to the, Madam Chair, thank you for those questions. They have great insight. I can't speak to the increase in the prevention funds coming from the cannabis tax. I think that in some cases we're yet to see the fruits of those labors. And so we have not implemented those in our funding. I can say that the investments solely in the designated agencies and the SSAs don't recognize fully that the ADAP system of treatment does not directly overlap with the mental health system of treatment. And our goal really is to ensure that we have a co-occurring system going forward. There's work ongoing between ADAP and the Department of Mental Health. And in this case, some of those funds were removed from the substance use treatment and put solely into the designated agencies who only form a component of the substance use treatment world. Further than that, the funds that were removed from the budget, those funds would have allowed us to do statewide prevention efforts at a critical time when we're seeing overdose and mental health deaths go up and increased use among youth. This pulls back that funding that we already know exists and can be deployed for those purposes, and limits the funds back to only certain communities who are able to engage in prevention.
Are you talking about the creation of more coalitions?
So it's creation of coalitions statewide. There are many communities across the state that don't have coalitions, or their coalitions are underfunded.
And is there data, I would assume then that there's a correlation between what you're seeing in terms of incidents of death or demand for treatment relative to where the coalition or not, or is that yet to be experienced?
Yeah, I can definitely ask the Department of Health to bring that data in. We are seeing statewide, again, in our mitigation and recovery, an increase in that, but I can ask them to bring in the data that really looks at the correlation between prevention efforts and the more recent youth data.
Other concerns, well, first of all, the Dale positions. I wouldn't expect you to not have anything that was not supportive of the governor's budget. And so you're going to be asking for that. I guess one of the questions we have is getting into Dale, and that's Senator Westman's section of the budget around the positions that you requested. And you want to go there now?
No, I wanted to ask that the reference was made to the 3% in staying within the cap. Does the 7% increase for most of the designated agencies in the House budget put us over the cap?
The 7, again, we're still in the process of negotiating that rate. What it does do is it increases us $21.3 million gross, or $9.4 million GF. which significantly eats into the investment room that we have. I don't believe at this point it exceeds it, but it comes close or near to half. Again, but we're in the middle of negotiations, and so we don't have our current or final numbers yet. Again, we're trying to work with CMS to understand the inflationary pressures of all of our providers, and also to understand, and in that effort, you know, DEVA for many years has been working to review the time level and the methods for our rates. You've heard that often as professionalizing rates. It's important for us to take that factor into account because we are looking across all of our providers, and the AHS is taking a new lens at that professionalizing rates so that it's not a single DEVA who's setting it just for their providers, but recognizing that the Medicaid providers go across the Department of Mental Health, across DAIL, across DCF, and looking to make sure that as we evaluate rate increases, this goes back, Senator Westman, to your question, as we evaluate rate increases, that we're ensuring that there's not just one provider group who is particularly good at advocacy, but that it's needs-based, that it's based on evaluating the timelines and appropriate methodology. And we can then evaluate where we'll increase across the full breadth of the system.
Well, I can tell you, we certainly can understand the advocacy dimension, because oftentimes where the greatest advocacy is, it doesn't necessarily mean where the most acute need might be. On the other hand, it's kind of a sad state when an executive director of a mental health agency is functioning as the director of children's mental health because of staffing. So we're getting, we're getting feedback from constituents around the availability of services, the demand for services, and how that translates into what those delivery systems look like. Senator Sears, you had a comment?
Well, I'm just dumbfounded by, are you suggesting that the designated agencies aren't providing services that the state is paying for? You mentioned transparency. I'm trying to understand whether you feel the designated agencies are wasting money. Let's put it that way. Be very blunt about it, because I'm seeing a reduction in services because they don't have the staff to provide those services. And they can't get the staff because they can't pay the wages. They're in competition with the state and other private providers. So I'm trying to understand what it is you were suggesting about the designated agencies. Or if you want to use a more example for me closer to home, it's the visiting nurses associations and those providing elder care on a 3% increase when they can't hire people to make services to the population, which is going to result in more people in nursing homes.
Yeah. So, Senator Sears, thank you. That brings up a very clear juxtaposition. I think in you speaking about the subacute system of care or the long-term care facilities and the designated agencies, we're trying to negotiate into our 1115 waiver the ability to ensure both of those systems are able to get the rates, get some rate increases rather than just being designated to one provider group, the designated agencies. When it comes to transparency, I think what we're talking about are two pieces. One is the transparency that not all of the designated agencies get paid the same rate for the same service across the state. And in fact, the variability is so vast that you cannot pin it to one reason for it at this point anymore. And so trying to get to a place where there's an understanding of that variability and to something that is more rational. The second piece there is really a quality piece. And it's not necessarily transparency simply to the state, but among the providers. And I think the most recent example that I can provide, and that you may have heard of already, is that across the state during the height of the last surge, we were working significantly with our hospitals and our healthcare systems to decompress the emergency rooms. And we were seeing a significant difference in different areas of the state in terms of the number of boarders that were there. What wasn't apparent to us until we pulled the data in terms of a transparency is that in many areas of the state, it's about 3% of the risk assessments were happening in the emergency room. But in one outlier community, 17% of those assessments were happening in the emergency room, which gave us the information to not necessarily blame, but to take a quality improvement framework to identify where the system was not working in terms of the resources so that we could address it. Without the willingness to have that level of transparency on quality, we can't work from a framework across our provider groups, so not just within the designated agencies, but with our hospitals and with the other providers in the community to address the quality issues. And in this case, that community was able to say, what if we looked at providing an alternative like a psychiatric ICU? Is there a provider in our community downstream where we could be that they're not open 24/7, and we were able to identify and address those issues. So as we move forward, we would hope that we could get to that level of transparency, both on payment and on quality, so that we could address the broader systems issues. And it's not a blame of the designated agencies, but it's a goal is to work together with the designated agencies and the other providers in each community to address the issues in front of us. But without the information, we can't do that.
But the reality is those groups are finding it impossible to get staffing to do the jobs that you're trying to pay for. So that's the catch-22 here. They're going to get blamed for not being able to provide the services, and they're not able to provide the service in part, maybe it's mismanagement in some cases, that's for sure, but in part because they can't afford to pay the going wages that people need in order to live. And I just, when I talk to my designated agency, and maybe they're one of them, I don't know, I've never investigated their from top to bottom, that's kind of your job. But from what I could see, they can't afford it. And then I deal with a local home health agency, and I know what they're going through. They're desperately trying to find people to work. And at a 3% increase, that's just not going to cut it. In particular, and then you got all the residential programs and other things. And when they see those agencies compete with the state, for example, the designated agency, a lot of those people are going to other state paid jobs, which are getting 10% increases, not to mention the problem with the pensions, where you're going to be dumping millions and millions of dollars into the pensions. And then we have the tax cuts on top of that take away about $100 million in money that might have gone to help designated agencies and others. I know it's not just money, but if we need to have better oversight over the designated agencies, that's your job. And I suggest that you may want to take a couple of positions out of budget and management and move them over to do investigation. Maybe it's the auditor's job. I don't know. But, if there's a problem, that's how it's usually dealt with, is by investigating and making sure that they're providing the services. But to cut them to 3% is a cut when the cost of living is going up by 8%.
That leads into my question. If that's the amount that we come up with, then inherent in our funding level have to come decisions around who we don't serve and exactly how our program should operate, because you can have expectations that you're not willing to pay for. And if that ultimately is what happens, then we need to be very clear, other than saying people are expecting to get services and they find out there's a waiting list. And the other thing, which I have seen the reimbursement rates, and the variability is hard to explain between DAs, and redistribution or setting rates. I mean, obviously the agencies that have had the benefit of those higher rates have built in their budgets and expenditures along those lines. And so you run into that problem as if you've been lucky to be on the high side, you stay in good shape. And if you're low, you're locked into it. But redistribution can really create some tremendous financial disjuncture. And so generally, it's sort of like a formula fight and water in terms of what that would look like when you get down to the impact on the individual agency. But the rates are certainly a known issue out there and of great concern, because how do you justify two DAs geographically connected and one earning, one being reimbursed at a much higher rate for the same service? So I know that's work that you have underway, and it's going to be a very difficult challenge, because it's if you attempt to redistribute, or oftentimes what happens is you just maintain and then you have to build up the underfunded areas, but it's still not easily achieved. So the other question that you have around mental health center?
Well, no, I was just going to say, in the conversations that I had with Commissioner White and Dale, trying to figure out the 3%, and I'll use examples for the adult days or for residential care homes. When I ask anything about what's salary levels, what's going on financially with them, to evaluate what your 3% increase was, there was very little information about that. So if you're trying to sort this out to across the board, have some better handle on that, I certainly would approve of that. So because there's very little information that you can get at times about what's going on with designated agencies for that. But that's going on right now, even with your 3% increase.
So let's keep going in terms of Dale. You have concerns around what the House did with the positions.
So yeah, well, I have concerns about that. I do want to ask Commissioner White, there was a section G300 in the ARPA funding in last year's budget. And the first part of that section talks about the 5 million in ARPA money that went out, and on a monthly, or on a quarterly basis, the adult days reporting back what their budget situation was like. The second half of that language talked about reporting back to the legislature about the closed adult days in Barry, Rutland, and Oxbow, and talked about the department making requests and reporting back to us in this fiscal year. I may have missed it, but I haven't heard anything about any report back or any requests for funds to help with that.
Commissioner White?
Yes, hi. For the record, Commissioner Monica White of Department of Disabilities, Aging and Independent Living. So I can say I was not prepared to speak to that particular question today. I will go back and follow up in terms of the quarterly reporting on the 5 million, and then what the plan is for reporting, the reporting requirements that you noted, Senator West.
The specific, it says that Dale shall request funding in fiscal year 22 budget adjustment process to provide restart grants in those communities. And I may have missed it, but I don't remember anything coming down about any of that.
I don't think there's anything in the budget, I think, or in the BAA to request funding.
Yep, I didn't hear of any, so, but if you could check the language in last year's budget in G300.
And the reason we were very concerned about that is because the adult days over time have been providing an increasingly complicated level, I guess, or a higher level of care for people, and foot care, bathing, not only nutrition, et cetera. So that as we look at keeping people in their homes and communities, having adult days as a resource was very much a part of that whole spectrum of services. And so the loss of those 3 centers was a great concern as it would relate to services available to individuals in those regions.
Yeah, and it's, I just say it's been conveyed to me, there are 2 people from Barry now being transported daily to Morrisville to the adult day because there's no service in Barry. And so the children of their family members are so they can keep their jobs.
So we'll wait on that. And then you, that Dale had requested, you had requested 10 positions.
Yes, you had the positions that were cut by the House, basically to review the residential care homes, I think. Could you speak to that for the committee?
Secretary Samuelson or Rich, would you like me to go ahead with that?
Sure.
Okay. So I think first I'd like to just state that it's not clear to us which of the 10 positions in the governor's recommended budget would be reallocated in the House version of the bill. To us, it just reads that 5 would be reallocated, and in the governor's recommended budget, as noted, there were 10 new positions, of which 6 of them would be related to long-term care facility oversight, 2 within adult protective services, and 2 within the Office of Public Guardian. So it's right now we've asked for information on what would be the proposed reductions to then reallocate to designated to developmental services quality reviews. We don't have that, so it's hard to say kind of what the impact would be because we don't have that. That being said, we are concerned by the House's action to reallocate 5 positions, which we had determined were priority that kind of impact our broader book of business in the 10 that we had identified as priority, to focus specifically on annual quality reviews for developmental services providers, which doesn't kind of have the whole scope of all providers that we do. So that's our disagreement with that particular action. I don't know if Rich or Secretary Samuelson, you'd like to add anything to that.
Could I, before, just clarify, the House reallocated 5 of the 10 positions. So they created 5 positions and then you don't know what they were for? Or are they reallocating existing vacancies? Did 10 positions get created? I'm not sure how to, or maybe Stephanie can help us what the House did on that, but on your slide here, it says the House reallocated 5 of the 10 positions created under E100, but it sounds like you only got 5 of the 10.
So I think that's important clarification. There were 10 positions total proposed. Significant number of those positions were proposed to emulate some of the quality oversight that we recognized during the pandemic happens for long-term care, but not other types of providers, as well as positions to address adult protective services. So those were 10 new positions that were created. 5 of those positions were then repurposed for another purpose, of which it's a little unclear which of those 5 were repurposed, but have been repurposed for specific objectives that are outlined in H720. So again, it's taking kind of what the goals were of the Department of Aging, Independent Living, and then reassigning that to a set of goals that were outlined by the House. Rich, you look like you were going to add something there.
No, thank you, Secretary Samuelson. For the record, Rich Donahue, CFO of AHS. That is all absolutely correct, both what Commissioner White and Secretary Samuelson just testified to. It was a total request of 10 new positions in the governor's recommended budget. How exactly the House had intended among those 10 requested new positions to be repurposed is unclear.
Okay, well, how do you create positions and not have positions? I don't know. We'll have to figure it out.
Right.
I don't know how you can create something that we don't know what they're going to do, but we'll see if we can get some clarity on that. And, you know, we're getting a lot of emails from family members about H720 and what that bill does and the importance of it. And that's 602,000 across funds. Can you speak to that? Obviously, they're concerned. Many of these are parents who are concerned about living arrangements, and I think they really are concerned about what probably used to be the old. A lot of placements were made with individuals, therapeutic, not care, I guess, not foster care, but adult care, and they really want to have better supports and other living arrangements. Seems to be a very common theme. So are you supportive of H720? If you can, you've got it as an observation. Could you share the agency's position on that bill?
Thank you, Madam Chair. H720 for the Agency of Human Services is a bit of a mixed bag. There are provisions of it, particularly the provisions you're hearing from advocates that the agency supports and are committed to, including exploring new housing options and allocating a portion of the HCBS funding to do that, so that we can look at diversifying the options that are available, recognizing that individuals with disabilities have significant varying hopes and dreams for their own living situation and their care, and that we should recognize and accept that diversity and look at how we can expand what's available. The mixed bag is what we were just talking about a second ago, is that it also provides a significant body of work for the agency, not under the housing provisions, I'll ask Commissioner White to speak to this, but a significant body of work, and reallocates 5 of the positions that the agency has asked for to that new body of work. And there are a few other policies that within the context of 720 that are difficult for the agency to support. So again, there are components of H720 that we are very supportive, particularly the housing components, and there are other components that are challenging for us to contemplate implementing. On that, Commissioner White, anything that you would add?
Yes, thanks, Secretary Samuelson. I think that summarizes it. So in concept, we are supportive certainly of the goals of the bill, and we're also very appreciative to the House Human Services Committee for focusing on this really important bill. That being said, one of the concerns would be reallocating 5 of the 10 positions in the governor's recommended budget. And then also we have concerns with, I believe it is section 6 of H720 that specifically would require the Agency of Human Services and Dale to receive legislative approval before we undertake any payment reform activities or payment reform activities, and also conflict-free case management, and both of which have federal requirements that govern those. And the administration is opposed to that language very strongly. So those would be the sticking points. To Secretary Samuelson's point, it's a mixed bag.
So you must have testified then in the House. Are you testifying in the Senate now?
I testified at Senate Health and Welfare. I believe it was March 24th. It was recently I testified to that effect at Senate Health and Welfare.
I understand conflict-free issue. We've had some obviously advocates for the families feel very strongly that that needs to be implemented. The SSAs and DAs are saying this is absolutely the worst time. Of course, it's been a number of years that requirement has been in place. Prior Secretary Smith had taken the position that they had to at least get started. And I don't know where that it's necessarily ended up, but I do know that there was strong advocacy from the council to say you've had enough time and needs to be implemented, and that seems to be coming in collision with the agency saying that with the staffing and the workload pressure, they can't do as much as you would like or can't do. And I think the responses will at least try to make some progress and work on some cases. So I don't really know where that stands at this point. I do probably believe that testimony is coming in from both places. On the conflict-free, how does H720 deal with that? Postpone it?
Yeah, I'll let Commissioner White speak to this, but I do want to make one of the points relatively clear. The conflict-free case management is a requirement of CMS to
I
the
know
state.
that. Yeah.
And we are out of compliance and have been for some time. And CMS has made it very clear that our funding and program will be at jeopardy if we don't come into compliance with conflict-free case management. So while folks may wish for some flexibility, and the state has discussed with CMS our uniqueness in Vermont, their patience has waned, and they've put us on a timetable in order to come into compliance.
I'm not surprised. It's been years. It's been years that requirement. But my question is, what does 720 do? Does it acknowledge the need to move forward on it? Does it attempt to intervene or ignore the CMS position?
It in some cases requires, and I'll let Commissioner White speak to this, approval of the legislature for any component of payment reform or the changes for conflict-free case management, which could jeopardize our ability to come into compliance with conflict-free case management provisions, which are really a federal policy of the Medicaid program and really are at the agency level to ensure that we are in compliance with the federal program. But Commissioner White, I'd like to turn it over to you to add to that.
Sure, thank you. So H720 as written would require Dale to seek and consider input from a variety of stakeholders, including individuals with developmental disabilities, families, DAs, SSAs, and other providers, which is fine. We will be doing that over the course of the work that the state will be engaging in to come in compliance with free case management, and then also require seeking approval from the General Assembly. And one thing that I would just note is that the conflict of interest in case management is not a DS specific item. It also crosses into choices for care, CRT, the community rehabilitation.
Yeah, that CRT is right there.
For mental, I'm sorry, what was that?
I said, yeah, I would expect CRT would be on that list.
CRT and brain injury, intensive home community-based services. So it's broader than just DS. So having a legislative approval requirement in there, as Secretary Samuelson noted, is problematic. That being said, we're certainly happy to, report out to have that be part of the scope. But so anyway, that's what we have for that.
Well, is there an appropriation in that bill?
No.
No, okay. You're just saying that there's a cost that comes.
Yes.
Physicians must have, the repurposing of the positions, the 10 that got created must have come with funding for them.
Yeah, Rich, I wonder if you could speak to that. There is an appropriation that's linked to that bill.
Yes, there is a cross-funding source, is a $602,000 appropriation to Dale in that bill, specific to AHS, of course. I'm not certain if there are other appropriations specific to other departments or agencies in state government.
Or just on
It's
the
from the
money
home,
up.
it's in the home and community-based plan. It's out of that pot of money. There's not a.
Correct.
Rich, did you say 602? Because I see 102.
It's 602.
In the version of the bill that I have recently seen, it was 602. There could be a more current version within committee.
For the as passed the House has 102 in the section 4 from the home and community-based service monies to fund the residential program developer position. Let's see if there's 500.
There's 500 is appropriated to Dale in the next section 5.
500 from general fund?
It's also from the home and community-based pot of money.
But they still have to have a match.
Well, the match is within the plan.
Yeah, okay. All right, so that's allocating money from that.
And then it's directing you to update the plan to reflect this, right?
Right, so there are other appropriations in the big bill currently for HCBS.
All right, well, I don't know what the plan is for a bill. I assume our health and welfare committee will be moving it out. We've kind of gone all over the place. Are there some other areas that you'd like to talk about? Obviously, we're familiar with the healthcare reform and global budgeting, but the money that we put in to help with the renewal of the waiver, all payer, and keeping Medicare at the table. That was in a bill. We had 500,000 for that with and tried to align the work of the board with what has to happen at the agency level. That's S285. And I know the House had 400,000 for that purpose, but there's 550. There must be something else they're doing there too. I thought it was 400. Wait a minute, that's million.
Yeah, they did 4 million. I don't know that they did the agency piece at all for the waiver. I'm not aware of it.
Oh, okay, but we did.
Yeah, the Senate bill does that piece.
So we did give you money in our bill, version of the bill too. But where's the general fund in 285? I thought it was just the 5 million. The slide here says it's 550 in S-285.
There is similar language and intention of appropriations. It appears from our perspective in both S-285 as well as in section E-345 of the big bill. And we were just bringing to your committee's attention for your consideration those sets of appropriations and language across bills.
So E-345 is the board.
Yeah.
The 550 was to the agency in the Senate bill, and then the remainder was to the board. But is the House actually directing money from the board's amount to the agency for the waiver?
Yeah, and section C on page 56, 600,000 is to support the board in developing, oh, wait a minute. Well, analytical support, maybe that's different. Of the funds to support the board and AHS in developing negotiation of potential agreement with, oh, that's Center for Medicaid Innovation. That's payment delivery, so that's not the same as renewing the waiver. Okay. Well, we gave you money for that. You probably like that, don't you?
I think in this case, we're just pointing out that the overlap between the two and also a continued desire to ensure that AHS is a component of or at the table and assisting to drive the conversation on the renewal and that advancements that happen therein to the healthcare system.
Well, that's why we, in the Senate.
S-285.
And that's why in this committee, we actually we amended that bill to make it very clear how that process would have to work and align and put in the review by the Director of Healthcare Reform. So we were trying very carefully to make sure that that the two pieces of work fit. And so I don't know, you probably looked at the bill then as we passed it out of here for that amended language.
I did, and I appreciate the commitment to ensuring AHS is at the table, and we'll do what we can to ensure that we're not just at the table approving the Green Mountain Care Board's plan, but actually working side by side with them, which is what I would hope that they would be willing to do, because much of that work will determine not just the payments to hospitals, which are usually within the purview of the Green Mountain Care Board, but the actual transformation of the healthcare system. Given what we've heard from CMS and what they would agree to in the next proposal, only a limited portion of that would fall under the purview of the Green Mountain Care Board.
Yeah, we understand, and we actually reviewed the testimony that Director of Healthcare Reform provided to, and that's why we changed it to try to, but our first draft was not acceptable to our colleagues down the hall. So we were trying to make sure that the work was aligned, would be reviewed by health, the health reform oversight. And I guess I would say to you, if you feel that there's an issue around, from our perspective, the renegotiation of the waiver is absolutely paramount. Keeping Medicare at the table. I will state it again. I stated on the floor of the Senate, the financing and the fiscal impact on the state of Vermont relative to those negotiations cannot be overstated. And that's why we wanted to have the work aligned. We wanted to have the oversight, the products. And if you feel that there's not the working relationship that needs to exist, we would want you to communicate that to us, because we were very, very clear that that was from the state's interest was really where we had to focus our attention. The budgetary impacts, and that bill had the whole moderate needs group. Well, in Medicare being part of the all payer, it's what pays for SASH, which is really moderate needs, as far as I'm concerned. Many of them are. So we cannot overstate at least from this committee's perspective, around having the AHS presence first, very much there, and aligning the work and having it complementary. So I will state that again, and we will be tracking it, and we will, if you feel that there's work that to be done that isn't happening, then we would be very troubled by that and would want to act on it.
Great. Thank you, Madam Chair. We appreciate your support as we go through the APM agreement and renewing that. We agree that it is paramount for us moving forward, whether it's the blueprint and SASH or whether it's the advancements of our next healthcare reform. We appreciate the work that your committee has done to really ensure that the Green Mountain Care Board and AHS are aligned.
Well, our intention is good, but if sometimes things don't work
Well,
out.
You've got our commitment to try to work to keep it on track as you intend, and we'll let you know if for some reason it's not.
That's really just all that is important. Just give us a signal or ask for a meeting, and we'll be more than happy. Anything else? I lost track of time. Our clock is blocked by.
It's right at 3:30.
3:30.
I've lost Commissioner Hawes because she had to.
Okay. Any other comments or questions at this point? You can imagine we're getting lots and lots of requests for funding. The other item, and Senator Sears, he left. Did he leave a little
Yeah,
bit?
he walked away from the
Okay.
It was just around the
It
corner.
was just around the
there.
corner. Any other areas or comments that you would like to bring to our attention while you're here?
I think that we've covered all of them. I will identify that we weren't prepared to speak to H2703 today, but it has broad impacts. It's an important workforce bill, but it has broad impacts across all of the departments in the agency. And as you begin to review that bill, I think it will be important to pull in those departments that are impacted. Again, it's the majority of the departments within the Agency of Human Services. I also want to thank you for having us in today, and thank you for the work that you're doing to thoughtfully listen to those providers. The exact reason why we're trying to create a balance in terms of the amount of funding that goes to the designated agencies is because we recognize the pressures that we have that you've identified across the system, including the adult days potentially needing rate increases, the PNMIs, the long-term care, the SUD treatment providers, the residential care providers. So I appreciate your willingness to hear us out as we work to try to balance those requests so that we can ensure that we have a solid network of providers to care for Vermonters and to care for those who are most vulnerable in our Medicaid program. So thank you for your time.
Oh, you have a comment?
I just want Commissioner White, I do have a meeting tonight to go over what Human Services in the House did with those positions, and I probably will be circling back around.
Thank you.
Yeah, right now we don't have a good context. We have your concern and we'll see what we can do to reconcile. Your concerns relative to what was done. The one thing that we have to do is a balanced budget, and you're talking about balancing, obviously, decisions that were made relative to revenues and some of the tax policies. And I'll use this because I'm sure many other people are listening. But if you start foregoing revenues, and we have some bills that have significant impact, reducing the revenues to the state by millions and millions of dollars, you take those revenues that are currently there, base revenues to support programs, and you say, oh, let's give a new program, and we do have one. We have the child benefit, the credit, and that could be very valuable. I could see that it could really provide tremendous benefit to a lot of very low income families and children in the state. And we're trying to work with that. Obviously, the level of revenues that you forego impact what we have to deal with budget pressures. And our concern is that you balance that out so that you're not continuing to underfund the areas that have been chronically underfunded. And that is the dance that we have between what we have for revenues, decisions made around tax policy, and what we have to support the services that are funded through the state budget. So it's something that we will be working on for the next few weeks and making it all balanced. But if you want to have further information or want to have follow-up, we have, obviously, people know who on the committee is assigned to the section of the budget, and we will try to make sure that we're giving everybody's concern full consideration. So we appreciate your being available this afternoon. It's been very helpful on this end as well. So thank you very much. I think at this point, Chrissy, that was today's agenda.
Correct.
Do you want to go back at all, Stephanie? And
If you would like to continue, we can continue.
why don't we see if we can whack off a few more sections and wrap up at 4? If people are willing to do that another half hour. Okay. So we were. Oh, I forgot where we left off because I flipped over to page care board.
Page 27.
27, Alice?
So that was,
Oh, no, grand list.
we're
We're
not beyond that.
Yeah, and we're deleting that whole big section that they have on their slide too. That-
Yeah,
No, no,
on
no,
page 32.
32 is public
Top of the
safety.
page. But before we get to public safety, there's always a before we do anything else. And there is, in this, before the public safety section is where you would put in also anything related to the state paid deputies.
Oh, okay.
And I have, I'm sure it's only in draft form, but also that change to the,
Well, Senator Sears has been working on that, so that's where his section would go. Do we have a draft?
we have a draft, it's just a draft that I put together from language.
Chrissy sent it to me.
So the first section, 205, is the draft that I,
Are there 2 pages?
let me see, pages, quick.
Well, one start.
It's double-sided.
It is supposed to be 2 pages, I'm sorry, I didn't staple them, it didn't come out of the machine stapled. There's a 205 and a 205-1. Does anyone have 2 pages?
Yes, I do. I have 2 pages.
It is, do folks,
Two separate pages or?
2 separate pages, 2
Oh, I
separate
only have
sections.
one.
So it's 4 sections, if you have,
Figure out why I had 3.
I have 205-1.
do you have, so you need a 205 to go with that. Does anyone,
I need a 205-1.
that's that, thank you. Sorry about that.
So we have E205 and it starts section 290, County Sheriff's Department.
Yeah, and this is just, this is the language that Eric Fitzpatrick had drafted in the Senate Judiciary Committee several weeks ago, right around, right around the break, for the town meeting. And so I have not heard back if there are changes to that language.
I don't think there are. I think that most, there are sheriffs who are not happy with it. But by and large, Sheriff Anderson and Sheriff Marcoux have worked on this with the Judiciary Committee, and what it does is
He's frozen.
You're frozen, Dick. You're not unstable, you're frozen.
oh, well,
Well, now you're just unstable.
First you're unstable.
oh, well,
Okay.
I know I'm unstable. That's been going on for years.
Do they,
Yes. I said Senator Sears too.
Okay,
this is fairly open, since the authority to determine job duties. So that was, is that
We can,
by intent to,
Yeah, to allow the flexibility to assign the state paid deputies to courthouse security, which actually in some cases they're already doing, by the way.
yeah, okay.
And secondly, it allows makes clear that as the state's attorneys, I think the intent of 2051 is to allow the negotiation with just one entity rather than 12 or 14 entities.
Which is
By
something
the
you
court.
wanted. Yeah.
Well, yeah, the problem for the
Also,
court
they
is,
also got rid of the money. They were concerned about the,
2051, I think it's just it eliminates the
money.
the per diem hourly rate set in statute, and it allows them to work with the budget they have and determine the, this is not the state paid deputies.
No, I
this
was
is the
gonna
per
say,
diems.
this is the per diems here.
oh, yeah, right. Thank you. Yep. Yeah, because you have the different rates from DCF and mental health and transport.
All right, so probably section E 205.1 is something that Annie Noonan and John Campbell have been talking about, and that's giving them flexibility.
To set the-
And because the $18 an hour is just unrealistic.
And they do that in collaboration with the Sheriff's Association. But it also makes it clear that a deputy sheriff doesn't get a per diem. You can't pay twice if they're already being paid for the work.
Oh, Jesus.
From another source.
All right. So is this okay with you, Dick? You think it captures?
Yeah,
You
we've
agree?
been through it. The committee's been through it. There may be some complaints from some sheriffs, but the idea here is to allow flexibility to use, when we get to the money portion, to increase the rates paid to the sheriffs by the judiciary
Mhm.
without incorporating all the money. So hopefully, part of this will be allowing state paid deputies to do courthouse security, which, as I said, there's been a general, I think that's actually gone in some counties, is already happening.
All right, so that would be what we would put in here,
Ahead of E208, yeah.
ahead of 208 committee. This has been something that has been worked on, because we've had that whole issue, and of course, there was the study committee that talked about the duties of those state paid deputies really needed to, it was outdated and needed to reflect the work and the demands of today. And so this is really taking that report and saying, we've got a state paid resource here that we're not getting the full flexible or the maximum return, and allowing it to be much more flexible and address our problem with courthouse security. And we do know that this group of sheriffs are very stable because they have the state pay and retirement.
Yeah, the state paid deputies don't have the vacancy.
That's right.
Struggles that other parts of law enforcement.
So,
It's about 20% compared to about 50 in other law enforcement.
so we will insert this language, and if somebody doesn't like it, I'm sure they will let us know before we finalize the budget. Then we can move on to 208, public safety.
This is the
That's the
language
same.
that's every year on the Essex County Sheriffs. And then 209 is these allocations that have not changed
Oh, yeah.
significantly. For the-
Mary Morrissey's 35,000 here.
Whoa, 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 whoa.
Oh, wait, and we,
Sorry, I thought that would, I thought that might elicit a response, Senator Sears.
have we raised, that at all for Essex County Sheriff?
It just,
It just says that they can contract.
they just says they can contract.
We used to do it
an amount, but I think we got out of that.
Yeah.
If my recollection is it's only 35,000, Bobby.
It wasn't a lot of money to the Essex County, but it was a way of recognizing that there was very, or none, state police presence in that county. The the drug task force.
Yep.
That's
That's been there
for
from,
a long time.
actually, probably, I don't know how long. Matt Birmingham was the head of the drug task force when that money was first appropriated, so.
All right,
There's a different guy now.
what?
There's a different guy now.
I'm sure, because Matt's been promoted, right? Now, the dispatch section 209.1, Dick, we're gonna have to take a look at that because you've been having discussions around dispatch and the need to move
Yep,
with some alacrity with getting more regional centers.
Stephanie and I met with Commissioner Sherling. I think he needs the release of some of the money in order to start, do the work. He talked about possibly a soft landing for some of the towns that haven't been paying that would now have to pay.
So that's the change I would think. The G part, which is on page 35, you may want to take out of the study part and just identify how much of the 11 million he could go forward with.
But you would still want to keep the working group and all that.
Well, you probably want to focus the working group really on the operational need,
So I guess my point is there a rewrite of this section?
I emailed with Commissioner Sherling this morning because he was working on it. It's not quite.
All right, so we're gonna hold this.
We're gonna hold,
Yeah.
where the focus is be on the operation, how do you have a system that eventually you get to, which is, the payers are understanding who the free riders are now, who the payers are now, if you get to a system that's got some sort of subsidy underwrite from the state, if there's capacity for that.
I'd like to get a little bit more explanation on the 4 regional centers, where they're gonna be, what they're gonna do.
No, there aren't 4.
Some of them are,
There's 4 new proposed that are the dispatch centers.
it'd be a total of 9, right?
No,
I
these are the local regional ones, not the state. There were to be 2 state ones.
Yeah,
Those are
you've
the two
gotta
that
keep,
exist.
you've gotta be clear that we're
Yeah.
talking about.
And then there are 4 existing regional ones, and then this proposal would bring on an additional 4, the last of which is Rutland, which is the furthest away from being able to turn on.
So
But we have the listing.
but I think that my understanding is that everybody's in agreement that we've got to start, because of the impact, other dispatch centers are picking up a huge load because of the, so the consensus is that there are some regional dispatch, there are entities that are willing to step in and are ready to go immediately, and we really need to deal with increase in the capacity here, because it's pretty stretched.
The capacity for who though?
The state police would keep 2, and then the 4 that are in existence would stay, and 4 more would come on. And what those 4 are, I'm not sure. It's the city of Burlington one.
There is a Chittenden County one, there's I didn't.
You said Rutland would be last.
There's up in your neck of the woods, I can't remember.
The Newport City, maybe?
Yeah, and then there's another one.
I think the other one was,
We have a detailed sheet on what those are.
Okay, so Reg.
the other one was in Windsor County, Stephanie, I believe.
Okay.
Where's in Windsor County?
Okay,
Windsor or Wyndham?
I will get the sheet, we have a sheet on
All right,
it.
rather than doing that, so.
And on your sheet, does it talk about the time, because I know there's upfront money and
Yeah.
does the sheet outline how they would get paid?
So there's
mean
some of it would
long-term?
go. So of this
Short
11
term and then long term.
Yeah, long term, I
So
don't.
some of the $11 million would go to the existing 4 regionals to help them, come up a bit. And then some of it, then it would go out, timing wise, I have to get that clear in terms of what the agency, the Department of Public Safety would put out. The first one I think that's ready to go is the Chittenden one, that's the furthest along with its agreements and whatnot. And then of that $11 million, which is sort of is 2.5 that was going to be the operational offset for a year. And that goes toward what is estimated right now to be a $12 million operating cost across the regionals. That's sort of what I view as the new cost that might be picked up by people currently getting free service. But that's what needs to be made clear in the study. If this work through the summer and fall, whatever the group composition is, gets to identifying what that operational cost is and what sources are coming from current payers, what sources could potentially come if there is eventual savings on the state side as a subsidy, and what might be the transition for the currently, what I call the free service folks.
So presently, they take the whole number of calls, they break up a pot of money, and you get based upon the calls you take. Then that 22.5 goes per seat.
Yeah.
And then what is ever left over, which, because that's only about 45,000 that goes for each seat, whatever costs more than that, the local region has held
that's
up.
what
Go out to their,
Bartow
So
so making that all clear in terms of who's paying now and who's not paying now because of the.
So going forward, though, they would envision breaking a pot of money for everybody, but it's unclear.
What you want is a study that comes out that tries to make clear what mechanism does cover this cost, because some of what's envisioned by the administration is that people that are getting a free service now would be starting to pay. It's just the timeline and transition of those is not clear. And whether or not there will be some savings or some alternate revenue source that could also underwrite the whole thing is not clear.
So the fear amongst those that are operating the service now is that they have the 1 year of dedicated fund for the startup, your 2.5 million. But after that it would all go away.
Well, they'd have to figure out what funding continues after that and where it comes from.
Yeah.
And that's, I guess, what this working group, because there are towns that are paying a lot and there are towns that are paying absolutely nothing for the dispatch. Now, 911 pays based on, they have a mechanism, but they don't pay for dispatch. So then the state police have got 2 sites and they're proposing to keep the 2 sites for state police dispatch.
But they are proposing that once you have the capacity up in the new regionals, that the state police sites would no longer dispatch for any of the locals, they would only dispatch for the state.
Which would mean that they would downsize.
Potentially, or they would, the struggle right now is it's so complex to dispatch for 100 different agencies, whether they're first responders or towns. That's the complexity they're trying to take out. And what's not clear is how much, when you ramp up this other capacity, how much you might have to redistribute out of that system.
I understand that,
Yeah.
because the local that do this now get all of the overload.
Yeah.
And about 40% of the calls are going to them. So our people have to, in my sheriff's office, they have to be trained to take all of this.
And it might be
Yes.
that the call taking function at the 2 state could come back up because they're below a metric now, and that would relieve some of the call taking pressure, but all the dispatch to anything that wasn't state would be back out at the local.
What I want to make sure of in this whole process is when we had a dispatch in Derby that took care of a big area. And it had to be improved and made better, so the state police suggested closing.
I know, and we had that battle in here and
they
we,
moved it
and we
to Burlington.
consolidated it to two.
Well, when they moved it to Burlington, we were told, I'm pretty sure, in here, that stool or stand or
And that's
whatever
when we took
was gonna be
savings, I
moved
think.
to Essex. Well, lo and behold, it stopped in Newport and never left. So that whole station in Derby went to Newport. And Newport set up a dispatch service. Now Newport, Troy, all the little towns have gotten pretty bad letters from the state telling them that it's over, that they better be looking for a new dispatch. So now Newport set up with a dispatch service that basically we paid for. And Troy's bill that came out at town meeting, $3,700. They've got to start paying
That's pretty cheap.
Newport to, well, hell, they only get 50 calls. I mean, that's pretty expensive, I'd say, for 50 phone calls. It's like, you know, the guy,
The problem is you've got to pay for the coverage, though.
well, we already did through our taxes. And what I want to make sure
Well,
of,
you're talking about the equipment.
yes, that we give Sherwin another $11 million to do this right. He's gonna take all the stuff in Essex and give it away to these dispatch centers that we've already paid for, and then they're gonna turn around and charge the towns. I mean,
Well, a lot depends on, I don't know what, that's what the study committee, it could very well be, it's the staffing. That's where your money is, because you've got to run it 24/7, and that's expensive. So I don't know, how much are they actually charging for equipment that they didn't have to buy, which needs to be one of your concerns. But that's what will have to be looked at.
one of those deals where we should privatize the thing and forget about it. Give it to the sheriffs and give them the $11 million.
Well, I think that's what's happening.
It's basically what's happening.
That's what's happening.
So.
And then police, well, once the 911 call comes in and gets referred to, they have to dispatch to their staff, just, so, that, and I guess they feel that two dispatch will work for them. What Stephanie and Dick were finding out is when you're having to dispatch and you have different fire departments and you have different entities and different programs, it's a huge body of knowledge for, and complexity to do. And, you know, at the time, I don't know as if we fully understood. And that proposal coming in to consolidate for two, what it would require, but.
Yeah, that, it's an exacerbating factor. The labor market was different. And
So Alice, you had
The volume is part of what is causing this crisis and the lack of staff.
the types of calls, the mental health calls.
So Alice,
I want to ask about, you know, at this, I think at the two state centers, they have a social worker assigned to them who goes out on cases. Is this study going to take that into consideration? That's a huge piece of keeping the mental health people out of.
They're not from the PSAPs, they're
No.
from the barracks.
so you're talking about the embedded social workers.
Yes, but when they get a call, they go out.
They do, but that would be dispatched through the state police system. Once the 911 call.
Nobody
comes-
else will get to use those people.
No, they're embedded.
No, they're embedded, but they can be used by local police departments.
Yeah, I think Springfield uses the ones out of the
Yeah, they,
barracks because they had their
I
own.
think that comes through the command of the local commander of the police, of the state police barracks, as works with the local police chiefs
Right, I
on
mean, the
that
ones who were
type
at
of memorandum.
Rockingham, they came from Springfield, had them, and with HCRS.
they're two different things, one of which is a call center 911, and then the dispatch.
Yeah, taking the call and then
and
figuring out
figuring
where
out
it needs to go.
And then
Yeah.
figuring it out. And then if they've got cooperative relationships about this embedded social worker
Yeah.
that's in their local state police barracks, we're not touching
We're not
that at
touching
all.
that, okay. And just in terms of the towns who have dispatch, is the idea that it sounds like in here that they're gonna look at the money that's being paid to them might be paid into this new system?
Or they could very well be the dispatch service that they've got remains and the
Yeah.
cost remains. If
And then-
they're,
and
if they're already being serviced as a Lamoille County Sheriff Dispatch service area, they may not be affected, Alice. It's probably the towns that have been, where they've been getting it free through.
The towns, or if there are, like ambulance services or fire departments that are,
And the other thing, you know,
I mean, it's a-
It is kind of confusing.
if they have an auto accident, the fire department automatically gets called out. And they're there directing traffic for the state police and all that. Don't get one dime. The fire department doesn't get one dime for being there.
If you're along the interstate, you get all those interstate crashes and calls from, goes to like the local department that's there and they go out and see the
That's
expense.
That's the ambulance people, if they go and take people to
They
the
might get
hospital,
paid.
they get paid.
Yeah,
Yeah,
But
they
the
get paid.
fire department doesn't get one dime out of that, and they get called every time.
Yeah, the interstate is a nightmare for those towns.
Well, I don't think we're gonna solve all the ills, but if we can at least get our dispatch
I
service
think
stabilized.
basic issue for me, and I think it's Commissioner Sherling and Stephanie are working on it together, have convinced me that we have to release some of the $12 million.
You do, if you're
Whether
gonna
it's-
expand to the additional 4.
yeah, if you
But in order to get this started, not delay it another year.
No, I think we're all agreeing that we're in a very fragile, high-risk situation and that what is happening with the calls by default ending up with the other 4 dispatch are really putting tremendous pressure and risk. And we need to move with some speed here. So we're anticipating that we'll rewrite this section, we'll be releasing some of this money, bring those 4 or at least the ones that are ready to come online to provide greater capacity. And then we'll deal with it, whoever's here next year.
in the budget adjustment or the next budget bill, you would be addressing the trickier issues of the operating feature, knowing that you only have whatever's in the
Right.
the reserve pot for the year.
Hopefully this working group will help to define the issues
And
and
having the League of Cities and Towns is really critical because they've got a mixed bag. They've got members that are paying through the nose and they've got some that are paying nothing. So they're kind of in an interesting spot, so to
I
speak.
think you started yesterday or Friday talking about no free lunches. Maybe it was today. But
Yeah, there aren't any.
I'm having mine right now, cost me $1.25.
So you got to have a free cookie. E212, but
I don't forget a thing, but.
no, I try not to. I'm gonna close out E212 and that's dry hydrants. So we're gonna hear from every fire department in the state.
What are we doing with them?
You have the same amount.
We have the same amount for dry hydrants, Alice. Close it out. And then military.
So this is the National Guard tuition benefit program.
Now, I actually know, and I think there was a separate bill, but I want to change the language that allows within that appropriation that if they've got a degree, maybe they got a degree in English, but they really want to go into some kind of very critical occupation area, they don't qualify right now. And it was at the end of that report, Stephanie, remember that I got from VSAC that
We're doing this, or they suggested the same thing for nurses, weren't they? That if a nurse had a previous degree,
You don't qualify for Pell if you have a previous degree. So the money in that arena doesn't go as far. You can't, the federal dollars don't qualify.
But VSAC said they had the funding that would allow them to be more liberal and that they
In the
felt
National Guard arena.
in the National Guard. But VSAC sent the report. It came from Maryland, Cargill, and it was the last paragraph of the report, Stephanie. I sent it to you.
Well, if you can't find it, find it.
I have it. I read it and I sent it to Stephanie.
Yeah.
And I said, we really ought to
Why
add that
doesn't it-
language.
Why doesn't it work now if you have a degree in?
If you had a degree in English and you wanted to go and get a certificate program, say to, I don't know, maybe you want to go into plumbing or you want to get a CDL, you can't because because you're disqualified because you already have a degree. And it may be in an area that where the workplace doesn't require that skill, but you would like to go into an occupation that makes sense. So I would suggest, and I
I'll
believe,
find that report you sent.
and I believe that there was a House bill to do that. And I wasn't bothering with a House bill. I was gonna say if it made sense, we'd put it in the budget.
If you can't have any trouble with
But
it.
it is only to the state funding source.
Yes.
The nursing side is where you lose the federal money if you have the, the early federal money, if you have the degree already. You don't get to, you're just excluded from now.
Yeah, because they feel like they've already funded you once and, not to do it again.
So, if you had a nurse that was, you're an institution, if somebody who's already completed a degree is probably a pretty good bet. In terms of, if the hospitals can help them, and more progress, then it becomes less, less burdensome to go through and get the second degree.
My goodness, I think I dropped coffee on that. So, I think we should, look at that because it seems like there are a lot of people that might have had a degree in history or English or whatever. No offense, a history major, English professor, yeah, he's way too smart.
I was gonna say, isn't English a critical occupation?
Court diversion, state fund, Richard Westman.
Yeah.
National Guard.
Been through court.
Find it.
Yeah, good,
We diverted him into the Senate.
I believe so. So. It's hard to keep the whole budget,
In your hands.
in my hands. League of Cities and Towns, the House didn't put money in that, and,
On our list
it's on our list.
for the continued support. Article 5.
Right. I'm on food bank. All right, the recruiting and retention, through the recruiting, there have been numerous inquiries regarding second degrees or advanced degrees. Prospective recruits in many cases have a degree and an expressed interest in shifting the focus to what the legislature has designated as critical careers. The current tuition benefit baseline budget would support an expansion of enrollment options. And I had asked, this is from Marilyn Cargill. And so I just want you to know, it's right here in my file. Because we have a huge list of requests, but this is not to spend more money, it's to give flexibility. So I don't know whether there's language that was proposed. We could look at that House bill and just, it seems like I remember something that would have done this.
The report I remember, I don't know if it was a House bill. You think you saw one?
I think I did.
Take up nursing if we.
Yeah,
allow that.
right. mind nursing, we didn't have to care for anybody. I'd be a terrible nurse. I really, and just like, as somebody said, teaching would be great if it weren't for the parents and the kids. So that's the report, and I would open it up for consideration if we wanted to.
Do it.
Yeah.
And so that was from Maryland, but we need the language. So if
Should
it
you-
got, someone attempted to deal with it in the house.
Should you hook something to that, that if they wanted to go for an additional degree of
This
it,
is recruitment to have them join the guards.
Yeah.
This is already the incentive.
Oh.
That's what we're talking about here.
but I wouldn't want to pay them to go to school to learn to be like you.
No, these are critical work, these are critical.
Don't wanna pay him to be like you.
No, it's
When already has
Coming to the guard with a degree that
I
they
met a
wanted.
guy in Bethel,
Yeah,
reading
it's
there,
good, just
who's
get smart.
ex-military, ex.
One that
he
takes
goes
a
in,
degree
not
that
a very
you
technical
need.
For the guard, they probably are looking to do something more technical and follow up on a second degree
He
from
got out,
there.
his wife is a graduate of Royalton High School. and
They
so
might
he
be
says
wrong.
they've been living in.
Philosophy degree. Let's say a philosophy
She
degree.
wants to move back to Michigan, has now her grandparents home in Royalton. They moved
All the
back.
cheese and
He
Chardonnay
made
you
like
can eat.
17 applications to
You
different
ever
state
really
agencies.
know
He sent me his incredible
Oh,
resume.
yeah.
They've
For
got-
most of them, he didn't
My-
get a single
my,
thing
stepdad
back from somebody got a phone
retired
letter
Air
saying,
Force.
we can't use you at
And,
this time.
Everything that came out of his mouth
I mean, he's
was,
the guy that we're dying to get here.
obscene,
Oh, what's happening?
funny,
Why is
and
he
it was
not?
some saying.
Well, I don't know, I said, send
Well,
your
yeah,
resume.
they screwed up.
So I'd say,
But I
Dad,
mean,
I
there's
wanna,
somebody applying
a
to
new
the state
car.
for jobs.
and he'd look at it and say, wow,
You know,
you're shipping
courtesy
all
of
cotton now.
back.
I'd be like, what does that even mean?
All right, so committee, I think we've had it for the day. It must be close to 4 o'clock. So I have,
You're like,
I'm late.
that's 10 after.
Oh, all right. So no wonder we're falling apart here. I'm going to adjourn the committee for today.